It was April 16th, 1989, when my parents, Carrie Long and Matthew Stevens, welcomed their baby girl into the world. They named her Dolores, unaware of the meaning of the name. Sorrow. Little Dolly had hazelnut brown hair and big brown eyes. My mother often spoke of how her rosy cheeks, fair skin, and pretty frilly dresses made her look identical to a porcelain doll. Even at the age of 4, people were surprised at how dainty and delicate she was. The way she was described by others, she was perfect. Despite her being an accidental pregnancy, my parents being no older than 15 at the time, she was considered a blessing. I don't begrudge the love my parents have always had for her, but for once, I wish I could have meant as much to them as she did. I never met the girl. I was born in 2005, long after she went missing. After losing Dolly and the series of miscarriages that followed, my parents had not much love left. I was born more for the sake of it than anything else. I never went a day without hearing about Dolly and my other lost siblings too. They attempted to name some of them, but gave up after the 8th. Babies that were never born, yet I could never live up to them. Memorial decor filled our home. Not that it ever felt like home to me. Hazel would have been a beautiful girl with hair like dolls. Angel would have had Dolly's kind nature. What about me? Mallory? Molly? I'm tall and thin, with pasty skin and beady brown eyes. I am not the beauty my sister was. But I'm here. I never left. You can just imagine how I felt when Dolly appeared on our doorstep in January, covered in dirt. Her hair remained in pigtails, and she wore a pink summer dress. Should she not be a 30-year-old woman by now? She turned 5 on her birthday, but was 4 when she showed up. I stepped out of the house to go to school and saw her sitting in the front yard, as if she never left. I paused for a moment, thinking it was just some random girl. I went inside and got my dad, telling him there's an abandoned toddler outside. Mum was showering, unaware I'd just found her long-lost daughter. "Oh, my, Dolly. Dolly, is that you? Come to Daddy, baby girl. I've missed you so much," he sobbed as he squeezed her tight. She didn't react at first, only when he pulled away, looked into her eyes and said gently, "Dolly?" Did she respond with an enthusiastic, "Daddy?" I was more confused than anything as I watched this all unfold. How could this child be my missing older sister? How could she just turn up 26 years later without a scratch on her and without aging a day? I tried to point this out, but no one acknowledged my protest. Needless to say, Mum was just as ecstatic as Dad had been, if not more. Dolores was sweet in the beginning. I'd sit and watch her play and draw. She was a normal, pretty little girl. I wanted to ask what happened, but my parents insisted we move past it. They were just grateful to have their Dolly back. I, for one, felt more pushed out than ever. My first real suspicion of Dolly not being Dolly began on the Thursday following her reappearance. I mentioned the stuffed horse she'd been known to carry around with her. She looked me dead in the eyes, then looked down at my drawing of horses in a field, and tore it up, all the while screaming, "I hate horses," over and over, until the paper was practically confetti. She then looked up at me again, and said in her not-so-sweet little voice, "And I hate you." I didn't chase after her when she stomped upstairs to her bedroom. I just sat there, mouth agape, trying to process what had just happened. Up until then, we'd been having quite a nice time scribbling away with her crayons together. Perhaps the horse was a trigger for her. I tried not to take it personally, but the oddities didn't stop there. Her once thick and healthy loose curls were falling out in clumps. Her ivory skin was turning a greenish blue. Her adorable brown eyes were blackening, and she was getting unexplainably thinner. I tried to express my concerns to my parents, but they wouldn't hear it. Dolly hasn't ever thrown a tantrum. Stop trying to get her in trouble. Don't say such things about your sister. Nothing is wrong with her. The last few months have been strange, to say the least. But nothing major has happened. For the most part, I'd had a nice time hanging out with my sister, and having her around made me less jealous than before. I didn't see her as competition anymore. Just my unfortunate, older baby sister Dolores. That was until last Sunday. It was the night before the anniversary of the day she went missing, and I awoke to her standing beside my bed, watching me sleep. Half asleep, I asked, "Dolly, what are you doing?" "They got rid of me. Then they replaced me with you. They have to pay." "What are you talking about?" "It's not your fault, Molly. It was Mummy. She didn't see me get in the car. She left me in the woods, and Daddy helped her. They have to pay." She then walked out and went to sleep. It didn't happen again, and neither of us mentioned it. I began researching her disappearance. The things she said, what did they mean? I thought about how she hadn't aged, and how she'd been covered in dirt when I found her. Then I thought about my mother's history of suicide attempts near the time of Dolly's disappearance. Then I thought about her unusually colored skin, her hair, and her eyes. I researched children going missing and coming back the exact same age. Dolores was one of many. All the children died mysteriously after being found, and a lot of them did strange things before they passed. Some killed animals, family pets, siblings, family, other children their age. Or they commit arson, attack people, or make strange art. I realized their art, actions, or weird things they said connected to their disappearances. Maggie Price was found in her backyard, 13 years after her disappearance, still a little girl, and covered in bruises. She cut her dad's hands off as he slept, before stabbing him in the throat. their decaying bodies were found 3 days later. There were all sorts of stories like this. It occurred to me to check Dolly's drawings. Cars, forests, dirt, shovels, Mum and Dad with X's for eyes. I ran to the garage where her toy horse was framed on the wall, then climbed into my dad's car. When I got to the woods closest to my house, I knew where to go. Our old dog, Ducky's grave. There it was, an empty hole beside his place of burial. Something had escaped. No, someone. I've been staying at a friend's house since then. I know that I can't stop Dolores from completing her unfinished business, or I'll become a part of it. I'm starting the grieving process for her and my parents now, to make it easier for myself when they die. To be honest, I'm going to miss Dolly most. I've lived in this house for the past 23 years. Just like the past 8,000 nights, as I was going to bed, I reached out to turn off the light switch in the stairwell, the one right at the top of the stairs, on the left-hand side as I go up. Except it wasn't there. I stopped and looked down. My hand was pressed against blank wall. I turned around and saw the switch on the other side of the stairwell. Huh? Had the switch always been on that side? It had been so long, I never really paid attention to where exactly the light switch was. It was pure muscle memory. Reach out, turn off the light, go into my bedroom. I looked down. Oh. I was holding a freshly laundered sheet and pillowcase in my left hand. That stopped me from turning off the light. Instead of switching hands, my muscle memory just told my brain, "Hey, go ahead and turn off that light with your other hand." Silly brain. There was nothing wrong. I opened the door to my bedroom and started pulling the fitted sheets over the mattress. I pulled the cloth straight, straightening out the wrinkles, neatly tucking the corners underneath. I repeated it 4 times, then with a sigh, got up and went into the bathroom. I reached to flick on the light. Blank wall. What the? I extended my other arm. After a second of fumbling, my fingers found the switch and flipped it on. I scowled at myself in the mirror, at the reflection of my bony hand, frozen on the light switch. I'm pretty sure the light switch was on the other side, next to the towel rack. Not there. I walked over to the counter and pulled the bobby pins out of my hair, then pulled it all up into a ponytail, securing it with a neon green hair tie. I reached down for the drawer to pull out my toothpaste. Except my fingers grabbed empty air. I looked down to find the handle a few inches lower than I expected it to be. Jeez, what's wrong with me today? I muttered under my breath. I grabbed my toothpaste out of the drawer, squirted it on my toothbrush, and furiously brushed my teeth. I bent over the sink and cupped my hands, filling them with water. I sucked it up, swishing, and spit it out. Straightened back up. Huh? Over my shoulder, in the mirror, the fitted sheet sat bunched up on top of the mattress. My heart dropped. I definitely put that sheet on. Then I frowned. Did I? Or did I just think about doing it? I turned around, staring at the bunched fabric. The cute little green polka dots distorted within the wrinkles. Then I shook my head and walked over to the bed, flapped the sheet in the air, then lined up the corners, pulled it taut, tucking each corner underneath. Looking good. I walked over to the windows and closed them, locked them, pulled down the blinds, then pulled the curtains over them. Without the light of the moon, the room was pitch dark, save for the sliver of golden light spilling out from the bathroom door. Leaving the bathroom light on so I wouldn't trip over myself, I sat down on the bed and turned on the desk lamp, pulled my Kindle off the nightstand, and opened the novel I'd been reading. Some dramedy about two very different women switching bodies. I read for several minutes, but then something caught my eye. The mirror. In the full-length mirror across from the bed, I could see my reflection. Blankets cozily wrapped around me, a cup of water on the nightstand, Kindle in hand. Except there was something horribly, horribly wrong. My hair was down. No, I put my hair up in a ponytail in the bathroom. I was sure of it. Otherwise, I would have gotten my hair wet in the sink when I brushed my teeth. Unless, maybe I absent-mindedly put it back down while I was reading. The neon green hair tie sat on the nightstand. I grabbed it and quickly put my hair back up. Then I stared at the mirror. My reflection stared back, eyes wide. You're just tired. You've had a hell of a day. Hell of a week. The presentation at work, fixing the cracked window in the basement all by yourself. You just need a good sleep. I reached over and turned off the lamp. Darkness enveloped me, and it felt, somehow, too dark. Usually there was light from something, even if it was just the blinking white light from my laptop, indicating sleep mode. But this was just pure darkness. Thick, heavy darkness, like a fog, filling the entire room. Go to sleep. You need sleep. I cuddled up to my pillow, closed my eyes, and began drifting off to sleep. My eyes shot open. The light. I'd left the light on in the bathroom, and now it was off. I pulled myself up out of bed. Hello? Is anyone there? Oh, good idea, Hannah. Announce yourself like every victim in a slasher movie ever. Groping in the darkness, I felt for my phone. I'd left it on the nightstand, which should have been a foot or two to my right. But as I continued to feel, my hand only fell on empty air. Where the hell is the nightstand? I walked forward with slow, halting steps. Then my toe collided with something. I hissed in pain, but reached down and finally found the sleek, smooth metal of my phone. I turned on the flashlight, and my blood ran cold. My bed, the nightstand. It was all on the left side of the room, not the right. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest. The white light jittered across the wall as my hand shook. I turned around, towards the bathroom. But I was staring at the windows. The curtains closed tight. I whipped around, and there was the door to the bathroom, on the other side of the room. What the fuck? I ran to the bathroom door, turned the knob, swung the door open and raced down the hallway. The stairs. The stairs didn't lead down. They led up. My flashlight followed the wooden steps as they went up, turned 90 degrees at the landing, and then continued upwards. At the top, there was a shut door. A door I'd seen 1,000,000 times. The door to my basement. A dream. This has got to be a dream. I pinched myself, screamed, tried to force myself awake. But I was still standing in the hallway that led up to the basement door. I raced up the stairs and opened the door, or tried to. It only opened a few inches before the chain lock caught. I thrust my entire weight against the door, pulling the chain taut. But the door wouldn't open any further. "Let me out!" Light blinked on. On the other side of the door, and through the crack, I could see something. Something familiar. A hallway with a cuckoo clock, cream-coloured walls. An opening that led to a small, wallpapered kitchen. It was my house. And standing in the kitchen was a woman. A woman with dark hair pulled back, with a neon green hair tie. Me. She held a toolbox and a garbage bag. Something like glass clanked against each other with each step she took. Then she disappeared around the bend, towards the garage. "Help!" I screamed. "Help me!" But no one came. I've tried calling the police, tried calling my mum, my friends, anyone. It never goes through, though. It seems like I have some sort of internet connection, though. And I'm not sure where this will be seen. But I hope someone will see it. And I hope you can help me. There's no point in hiding my identity, because I know the government can easily find it through a quick search of my email, or by tracking my IP address. So, let me introduce myself. My name is Carter Ernest, and I just turned 22 in March. But let's get to the point. I want to share a story about my friend, Robert Jettings, and our high school days. We used to have a big group of friends called the Bang Gang. Although I admit it sounds quite silly now, please bear with me, as we were all immature back then. We were juniors, around 17 years old, except for Hailey, who turned 18 a few months before us. We affectionately called her Mama Bang. Each of us had ridiculous nicknames that the others came up with. For instance, they named me Treadbang because of a treadmill incident at the gym where we used to hang out. Joseph, the guy who brought us all together, found me lying on the ground after I tripped on my untied shoelaces while running. He decided to give me a ride to Hailey's place, who was studying to become a nurse and could take care of me. While trying to help me up, my shoelaces somehow tied themselves together, causing me to stumble again. Fortunately, Joseph caught me before I fell hard. That's how we all got acquainted. And that's when I met Robert, the funny one in our group. On Saturday nights, we usually went bowling or visited the local brewery to play pool or table tennis. Now, let me tell you why I'm telling you this. About an hour ago, when I returned home from work, the receptionist at my apartment complex told me I had received a letter. She handed it to me with caution. It looked as if it had been tossed around like a football in a baseball field. I took the letter upstairs to my apartment, placed it on my TV stand, and went to grab a bite to eat. Although I mostly forgot about the letter, it suddenly popped into my head while watching TV. Damn ADHD. I jumped off the couch, hurried over to the letter, and opened it carefully, avoiding the grimy parts. Inside was a piece of paper, folded into thirds, torn out of a spiral notebook. As I read the words at the top, "Carter, please believe me," my eyes shot to the bottom of the worn-out paper, which read, "Goodbye, Robert." I was stunned. At first, I thought it was a prank by someone from our old group. Robert had gone missing toward the end of our junior year, and was presumed dead. But his body was never found. Disbelief and curiosity flooded my mind, urging me to read on. "Carter, please believe me. I swear what I saw tonight was true. I wasn't fooling around, I swear. None of you believed me when I tried to tell you about it around the campfire, thinking I was just trying to scare you. But I wasn't lying. The moon flickered. I know it sounds crazy, but I saw it happen. 2 distinct lines appeared, flickering up the moon, like an old cartoon playing on a black and white television. It lasted for only a second, and when I told you all to look, it was gone. I wish you would just believe me. I can't sleep after what I witnessed. I tried researching online but found nothing. Whenever I posted about it, the posts vanished, as if a bot instantly deleted them. I can't even text anyone about it. That's why I'm writing this letter. I can't text anyone, and I'm freaking out. My parents tell me to stop messing around. Carter, you were always the serious one in the group, so I'm hoping that by sending this to you, you will take it seriously. August 17th, 2013. Goodbye, Robert. I read the letter over 600 times, trying to make sense of its contents. It didn't add up. How could Robert have written this in 2013, the year he went missing? Doubt and confusion swirled within me, but I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. With a sense of urgency, I reached out to the remaining members of the Bang Gang, sharing the unsettling letter from Robert. Composing a message, I sent it to our group chat, urging everyone to read it and respond as soon as possible. It wasn't long before my phone buzzed with replies from each of them. Hailey, now a full-fledged nurse, was the first to respond. She expressed shock and disbelief, questioning how Robert could have possibly written the letter after all these years. Joseph, always the voice of reason, suggested that we meet in person to discuss the situation and attempt to unravel the mystery. We agreed to gather at our old hangout spot, the local brewery where we had spent countless Saturday nights during high school. As I entered the dimly lit establishment, a palpable tension filled the air. The familiar sounds of laughter and clinking glasses felt hollow, as if the energy of the place had been drained. Hailey, Joseph, and I settled at our regular table, anxiously awaiting the arrival of the others. One by one, the rest of our friends joined us. Emily, the quiet and observant one, and Jake, the adventurous thrill-seeker. Greetings were exchanged, each reflecting concern and confusion. I placed the crumpled letter on the table, and one by one, my friends took turns reading its contents. Their expressions mirrored my own, an unsettling mix of disbelief and unease. We engaged in a heated discussion, analyzing the letter and attempting to piece together a plausible explanation for its origin. Joseph suggested that it might be a cruel prank orchestrated by someone who knew about Robert's disappearance and our shared history. However, as we delved deeper into the details, an eerie realization washed over us. The mention of the flickering moon, the strange online censorship surrounding Robert's attempts to share his experience, and the inexplicable delivery of the letter. After all these years, it was too peculiar to dismiss as a mere prank. An unsettling silence fell upon the table, broken only by the distant hum of conversations around us. We exchanged glances, each of us contemplating the implications of the letter and the growing sense that something extraordinary was at play. Driven by curiosity and a desire to uncover the truth, we made a collective decision to investigate further. Drawing upon our individual skills and expertise, we assigned tasks to each member of the group. Hailey would delve into her nursing connections, searching for any records or peculiar incidents related to lunar phenomena. Joseph would scour online forums and deep web communities, hoping to uncover any traces of Robert's posts or similar experiences. Emily took on the responsibility of researching local legends and paranormal occurrences, seeking any folklore that might shed light on Robert's encounter. Jake volunteered to visit the location where Robert claimed to have witnessed the moon flickering, hoping to find physical evidence that could validate his story. Days turned into weeks as we immersed ourselves in research and analysis. Late-night conversations and frantic exchanges of information became the norm. Each new revelation fueled our curiosity and heightened our unease. We realized that what we had stumbled upon was far more profound than a simple prank or odd coincidence. After weeks of tireless investigation, we had come up empty-handed. No concrete evidence, no substantial leads. It was frustrating to say the least, but we refused to give up. Determination fueled our perseverance, and we knew we had to keep pushing forward. One evening, as I sat in my apartment, contemplating our next move, an idea struck me. I decided to set up a camera outside, pointed directly at the moon, hoping to capture any peculiar activity. I enlisted Joseph's help to program a rig that would constantly track and record the moon's movements. With everything set up, I left the camera running throughout the night, The following morning, I retrieved the camera and transferred the massive 215GB 4K video onto my laptop. The prospect of reviewing hours of footage was daunting, especially given my attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Realizing I would struggle to sit through it, I reached out to Jake, knowing his adventurous spirit and willingness to explore the unknown. After 6 days of anticipation, Jake sent me a screen recording. It was a snippet from the video, precisely at 4:48 a.m. The footage abruptly cut to black for 1 second before resuming. I watched in awe as the screen flashed back to life, revealing a startling image. The moon, typically serene and unchanging, flickered as if glitching in a digital display. 2 distinct lines appeared, reminiscent of the static of an old black and white television. It only lasted a moment, but it was enough to send shivers down my spine. Excitement and trepidation surged through me. It was a breakthrough, a tangible piece of evidence that corroborated Robert's claims. I shared the screen recording with the rest of the group, and their reactions mirrored my own astonishment. We had just confirmed that Robert was right. The moon had flickered. It was an unimaginable sight. Hastily, I reached for my phone, eager to share the video clip on my Snapchat story. To my surprise, it actually sent. Anticipating the flood of views, I refreshed the page, only to find it had disappeared, just as Robert had predicted. The realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. Turning to the group, I confessed that the video hadn't gone through. The question that lingered in all of our minds finally escaped my lips. Is this the reason why Robert disappeared? The answer was apparent to all of us. Our messages and posts were no longer going through. Fear overwhelmed us, and we trembled, struggling to find the right words. Uncertainty loomed large, and we sat there, anxiously awaiting the worst for hours. However, nothing came. One by one, Jake, Emily, and Joseph decided to head home. Eventually, I drove home. Alone at my house, still unable to send text or post anything, desperate to communicate, I grabbed a piece of paper and began writing this. I can only hope that someone discovers it and shares our story. September 9th, 2018. Goodbye, Carter. During the recession of the early 80s, employment was hard to find. I was a maintenance man with a great work ethic due to my military background, but most employers turned me away. I did not have an engineering degree, though I was better than most who built things for a living. One day I went to a bar on the Nevada side. Believe it or not, that was how people networked in those days, when they wanted to find a source of income. I was already living out of a van. I survived on PB&J sandwiches and ramen noodles. I walked into that tap house and struck up a conversation with a man named Gillen. He had sat next to me. He was well dressed in a press suit and almost seemed out of place in such a dive. The dust mites in the rays of sunlight settled on the counter between us as he sipped his highball.
"You look like a biker from an action movie,"
he said. "I'm a handyman, searching for a job," I said. "If you know anyone hiring, I'd love to interview."
"What can you do?"
Gillen asked. I did not want to sound like a braggart, but I responded in full by notifying him there was little I was incapable of. I could perform cleaning, light repairs, landscaping, carpentry, and fix appliances. A wrench is a natural extension of my body, I said.
Well, I'm installing a fence around my property,"
he said as he finished a gin and tonic.
"The contractors I've talked to want to destroy my wallet. You think we could work something out? I'd rather give money to a stand-up guy like you than some of those con artists claiming to be something they're not."
"Yes," I said. I proceeded to ask him how many feet of wire he needed. I told him off the top of my head how much the cost would be when he responded that it would be thousands of pounds worth. I reasoned his estate must be massive. He also emphasized that he wanted barbed wire. I should have found that detail alarming, but I did not think much of it in the moment. "When can I look at the place?" I said.
"Tonight,"
he said, as he shoved the tumbler towards the server.
"Hell, right now."
We went out to the parking lot. An Audi was awaiting us, the headlights already turned on. A man in a suit sat behind the wheel. I could not fathom having a chauffeur. "What do you do for a living?" I said, after we settled in the back seat. I could not hide my curiosity anymore.
"I'm a biologist,"
he said.
"Not at a stuffy university either. I operate my own lab. We do important research."
How far away is your place?"
"Oh, only a few miles. There's something you should know. There's an entire wing of my property under renovation. It would make me happy if your services are available to work on it as well. How long do you plan on staying here?"
"Until I die, if you pay me well enough," I said. He laughed at that as we approached the manor. The gates opened, and we followed a winding concrete pathway surrounded by a dewy green grass. Their blades glistened in the moonlight. He walked me up to the top level and patted me on the back.
"If you give me your car keys,"
he said,
"I can have my driver go to your vehicle and collect your tools. The construction zone is yours to stay in if you think you can be comfortable there."
I had told him earlier that I was new to town, but I did not expect him to be so welcoming. I had to keep in mind he was still intoxicated, and I thought I should take his kindness for granted. It was not a daily opportunity to stay in such a luxurious place after all. It would be the most torn apart section of it, but I had to take it. I'd be grateful for that, I said as I handed him my key. "Please have him bring my backpack as well. There's a sleeping bag and paperback novel in there." He gave it to his employee, and within half an hour, I found a corner to shack up in. He did not know that he had, within 5 hours of meeting me, welcomed a criminal into his house. Granted, I was not an evil one. I like to think of myself as having a better moral compass than the average lawbreaker. See, I robbed a bank in Paso Robles after my wife got sick. Not only did a few witnesses give the authorities my description, I was behind bars when she passed away. That was not for him to know, though. I knew if I told him, he would assume I was a malicious and unrepentant thief. Better to keep it quiet. I curled up underneath my blanket. Sawdust surrounded me, and a breeze came over the Sierra Nevada mountains in the distance. The room I was in was a work in progress, since there were no walls, only beams and rows of grimy floorboards. The level looked out at the gardens and the park next to the house. I was grateful to not have to sleep in the cramped space of my fort. I had one goal. I had to show him I was valuable, and then he would let me stay here until the projects were complete. I awoke around midnight, parched from the few beers I had drank at the establishment earlier. I walked near the stairs to head to the kitchen, and a verdant luminescence caught my eye. I looked down at the forested pastures. The two men sat across from each other over some kind of board game. The board, which I presumed to be chess, glowed a neon green between them. One of them turned and peered up at me. The gaunt look he possessed made a shadow appear around his eyes, and I could not make out their color. I turned around and tried to go back to sleep. The next night, a bout of insomnia overcame me. I had spent the day hanging drywall after hours of fastening bottom and top plates. How tiredness had not gotten to me was a mystery. I tried every trick I knew to get back into a slumber. I tried breathing techniques and meditation from psychology books I found in prison. Nothing seemed to work. I tried to get lost in my paperback, a collection by Richard Matheson, and all it did was captivate me. I looked out to see if those men would be there and continuing their competitive match. I did not understand the hours they kept, and a part of me wondered if they were casing the area to burglarize it. If my negative suspicions were true, that had to be the strangest front ever put up by a potential home invader. As I scanned the wilderness, what I saw next stunned me. Two women sat down next to each other in a thicket of trees. Both of them appeared to be in their mid-30s. Their faces were visible, but they wore yellow hazmat suits. I crawled to the edge of the flooring to get a better view of them. Their choice of clothing concerned me. That was when a man leapt out from behind one of the pines and chased after them. Even from my vantage point, he was huge, very lanky and towering. My instincts kicked in. I went downstairs and ran into the woodland in pursuit to help. This was a foolish maneuver, from the standpoint of self-preservation. But I had to. Leaves crushed under my feet as I made my way deeper into the outgrowth. A screwdriver and box cutter were in my pockets. They would be the only weapons besides my grappling should an act of violence occur. A rabbit hopped by. It stopped to look at me before it moved behind a log. I saw a skull drawn on its fur in a black marker. I observed a clearing in the distance and heard a masculine voice. I inched closer. Something crawled in the trees above me. The sound of something sharp scraping on wood floated. Although not a religious person, I prayed it was a mountain lion. I continued to follow the chatter and saw the same two men moving their paces on the chessboard. One was the bully who had driven the woman away from their peaceful spot. What struck me as odd was how gigantic both individuals were. I was 5'9", but these men had to be tall enough to puncture most ceilings. At least 6'7". Both had blanched faces. I crept behind a bush and watched as one of them boasted in the victory of the match. What they wore was even stranger than the wardrobe of the woman I had seen earlier. They both had leather-long coats. Wires and patches hung from their exposed chests, as though they had both escaped from a hospital. One looked in my direction. I knew the obscurity and terrain would cloak me, but him hunting for me out of pure alarm caused a memory to well up. I was in the jungle as I tossed white phosphorus smoke grenades between bamboo stalks. I hoped the bullets flying around me would not connect. I shook my head and came back to the present moment. Now was the time to remain focused. I kept low and made my way back to Gillen's house. I was unsure of what had happened to the females, but relieved to have returned to my new home. The moonlight seemed brighter when I went to rest. The light of it washed over me. I was unable to do anything but stare out at the tree line in anticipation of what else it could bring.
"Oh, there's a third room I want you to work on,"
Gillen said as he cut into syrup-drenched French toast. We sat at his kitchen table made of marble. Maple wood cabinets surrounded us and had stainless steel handles. I had never been in such a high-end dining area. I kept expecting his wife or kids to come down and commiserate, if he had any. I had started to form the conclusion that he was without family, but I did not want to pry. "Sure," I said.
"My basement needs to be a little livelier. Make it modern. Newer."
"Like a bachelor pad?" I asked. He stared at me, his forehead crinkled. He savoured the last bite of breakfast before he put his silverware down and finished a glass of milk. As he picked up a napkin and wiped his mouth, he stared at me and placed it in the puddle of liquid sugar on his plate.
"No,"
he said with a shake of his head.
"I need it to be pleasing. Imagine if you were remodeling a room you had to stay in no matter what. A place you could not escape from unless you were willing to die. I will show it to you soon enough."
I paused and nodded. He was the boss, and though his request was vague to me at the moment, I agreed. Yet I had to state what was bothering me. I wiped my forehead with the napkin before I went further. Who owned this land before you?" I asked.
"Why are you concerned about that?"
"I spent some small amount of time in Da Nang, Vietnam. I don't know how familiar you are with the geography over there, but it's the capital of the Lam Dong province. It's a scenic place, and the locals call it the City of Eternal Spring. There's a villa there called Pren Pass. One night I went there on a lark, disobeying a lot of direct orders to try and get away from my station. I didn't get caught. While I was there, I saw a woman fall through the window. I later found out that it was a haunted domicile. A woman escaped and fell to her death to get away from a real horrible man. In other words, Mr. Gillen, ghosts exist, having seen one myself. I also think the outskirts of this place has them. I saw two men playing some kind of game, and a couple women dressed like they were getting ready for the end of the world. Of all the responses I may have expected, laughter was not one of them. which is the exact thing he unleashed on me. Once his chuckles stopped, he stood and pointed to the other end of the area. He motioned near the living quarters where sofas and coffee tables sat.
I want to tell you what I expect out of the basement upon completion,
he said. I was a bit irritated that he ignored my tale, as though he had not listened to me at all. I still followed him. Even after all these years, I still respected rank structures, often to my own detriment. He opened a door and led me down a flight of stairs. It did not take long for me to realize it was an underground fallout shelter. The place had metal barriers. Stacked around the chamber were crates of non-perishable goods. In the center was a metal slab with beakers, vials, and microscopes.
There's something I have to confess to you, he said. Something I have not told anyone else or even spoken about. You know, your eyes are not lying to you. You're a reasonable man, no doubt.
He took a seat and offered me one near the scientific setup. I obliged and tried to get comfortable, impossible as it was.
You might think this place is to guard against imminent danger from the Russians,
he said.
That is somewhat close to the reality, but it's not the entirety of it. In truth, this place was here before the tensions between the nations even started. This place used to belong to the government before they relinquished it and put it on sale. They did so because something tainted it. Of course, they wanted to sell it to someone who wouldn't find this room in particular to be odd. When the government owned it, this was not a residential property open to the public. It was a very private and guarded testing site.
For what? I asked. And what left it tainted, as you said?
There was a laboratory for recombinant DNA testing, to aid humanity should the worst-case scenario of the bombs dropping happening.
He took a seat and scratched his brow. Mr. Gillen, I know I may look stupid, but
they wanted to create a species of man that could withstand blasts of nuclear power,
he said.
This is where they housed and collected data on those subjects. The motive behind it was to create an indoctrinated soldier, someone who could crawl across a radioactive continent to get to the enemy, and take them out as they cowered in their bunkers. You may be wondering who the victims were in these experiments. Many were volunteers. Some were the byproduct of artificial embryo twinning. Some people in the field of science fiction refer to it as cloning. I find the term pedestrian and not accordance with true scientific terminology. Other guinea pigs had labels. Enemies of the state, for example. Ones cherry-picked by the top brass in the Department of Defense. They could only kidnap, detain, and ship those that would go unnoticed when they went missing. So, drug addicts, the homeless, ex-felons.
He took in a long breath before he gave the next description of an undesirable.
Bank robbers.
Gillen lit a cigarette and seemed to revel in watching my face. Okay, I said. So some people got brought here against their will?
Yes, and some tricked into coming here. Others were not aware of their true purpose until it was too late for them. This lab specialized in long-term nuclear consequences, on those with modified genetics in almost, dare I say, superhuman ways. The two women you saw are students who thought they were here to study chemistry. The two men were test subjects who used to determine who would get hit with radiation first. They would come up with that outcome by playing a game of chess. The loser had to walk into the sphere and take the Roentgens first. See, we were not picky in the early stages of who we tested. As the time had gone on, we decided we needed people who were athletic and had training. I took out my box cutter and sliced his ear. Blood spurted out as he backed away, up and out of his seat, and fell. I ran out of the house. His driver tried to stop me at the front gate, and I punched him in the abdomen, hard enough to where he doubled over. I scaled the barbed wire and ran for miles. It occurred to me that no one was going to believe my story. I collected my vehicle, which was still at the bar, and drove out of town. For the next several weeks, I worried if he would go to the authorities and give them my description. That did not happen. I guessed he did not want the investigators near his premises, searching for evidence. They would find incriminating writings, notebooks, and research materials. As the decades have gone by, I ponder that dreadful day. The alleged biologist and his speech made me think he was an insane person. I ruminate on whether the people I saw were either figments of my imagination or something else. Terror grips me often. What if he told me the truth in our final conversation? My name is Quentin Loreno. I'm somewhat of a middleman in the criminal underworld. I mediate the crime families. I arrange diplomatic marriages. I keep things civil. But above all, I host auctions. Art is a tastefully wonderful medium of laundering money, and hosting both underworld and legal auctions is kind of my speciality. And I also recover and sell cursed artifacts. I'm not intending to talk about the people and things I deal with as the middleman here, though. No. I'm talking in regards to a very odd painting a client wanted me to recover. This deal, like the majority of my deals, was a perfectly legal deal. It started with the woman in my office. I owned an auction house downtown, and it had been a chilly morning, with wind and fog deep in my breath. Only I had the key to the place, see? And when I saw the lock had been snapped clean, I shuddered with more cold air than fear, and entered, a small pistol in hand. There were things in my offices ordinary people would freak out on. Dealings with the family. Strange artifacts that did things the normals could never understand. Only good for laundering money. "Loreno?" A voice called out within my office. Old. Hoarse. I looked up to see an old grey-haired woman. Old enough she could have been my grandmother. "The mediator. I've been expecting you." 4 men with weapons, I noticed, flanked the old woman. She was clearly someone important. "Are you here to make a deal?" I gingerly inquired. "A truce with an enemy?" "Nothing of the sort," she claimed, beckoning a hand and inviting me into my own office. "I'm here on a perfectly legal basis.
says the woman who's broken into my office, I argued. She laughed heartily at that. I understand, but I assure you, nothing has been taken. I only wanted to... She gestured around. Ensure you were the real deal. Which context? I asked. I've done many things. Artifacts of the odd kind, she revealed. So she wanted one of the weirder things I've barred off. Something less than human and more ancient, creepy, bizarre. Cursed artifacts, odd devices, that kind. I occasionally deal in the divine. The old woman beckoned for me to take a seat, and so I did. She told her story, the things she had been searching for, and the sums of money I would be paid. I'm looking for a very specific painting, she began. A very old one, painted in 1866. I suppose you don't know of the work of Isabella Corelli. I shook my head. I was not too familiar with the art I dealt with. No, my assistant Stephen dealt with that. Who? She was an artist touched by God. She painted many things in her youth. Boring things. Still life. The things that do not interest me. And one day, she was called by something beyond the veil, and from then on, was possessed by a certain... She thought of the word. Essence that gave her paintings life. The bell rang in the distance. I checked the time. An auction was due to begin in an hour, and I assumed that was Stephen getting things ready. Look, I don't have all day for an art lesson, lady. Fair. I was a young girl when I saw it. The face of God. Her last and final painting. She answered. This very auction house, when your father ran it, they were selling those artifacts, and I wasn't allowed to see what went on in there. But I hid somewhere and watched. She sighed. And then they unveiled their prize painting, Corelli's Face of God, and they screamed. Every single person. I only saw a glimpse of the painting, but it was the greatest thing I had ever witnessed. Sorry, but as I recall, I had read up my father's files a while back. Didn't everyone who saw that painting die? Indeed, the woman confirmed. But that glimpse, it was beautiful. And I am dying anyway. And if I were to die, I would die looking at the face of God. I know you have records on who bought it. I am willing to pay double to whoever made the purchase. It was so magnificent, beautiful, such sublime. Okay, I got it, I concluded. I'll find the painting. Now, I do have an auction to attend to. She had one of the men hand me a briefcase. Anything you need will be funded for. She handed me a card. Call me if you need anything. With that, the woman left, leaving me with a mission and an auction to run. I checked the briefcase. Dangerous or not, the money she offered would set me for life. It wouldn't be too hard to track down a painting, right? one that also massacred 50 people looking to buy the artifact. "Stephen?" I called. The bumbling old man ran over. "I need to find one of those artifacts. It's called the Face of God." "Corelli? You want to mess around with one of those?" he warned, eyeing me closely. "It isn't for me," I replied. "Client, perfectly legal, is willing to pay the owners for it. We just gotta find whomever bought it. And by we..." "You mean me?" Stephen finished. I nodded, then informed him it was an auction my father had done. "I'll be right on it." While Stephen went off to check the records, I had a more pressing matter to deal with the day's auction. But that was easy work, and I could trust one of my many other assistants with it. And the more I thought about the woman and her wishes of death, the longer my mind kept tugging at the name she'd mentioned. Isabella Corelli. I couldn't place it, but there was something deeply familiar about that name. It was one of those intuitions you just knew. So I called over a friend of mine, one who had a keener knowledge on those artifacts. He worked at a company that recovered them, and I'd long brokered a deal with him to smuggle some over from time to supplement my business. "Quentin," he greeted, picking up my call. "How are things over at the auction house?" "Things are good, Canopy," I responded. "If you're calling because I haven't dropped anything by in a while, you're not in luck. Company 7's tightened up on security ever since the Cassie incident. Not anything you should worry about." I shook my head. "No. Actually, I'm calling because I need information," I confessed. "Tell me, old friend, what do you know about the painter, Isabella Corelli?" He frowned enough that I could taste the concern, even through my laptop. "Nothing good comes from seeking a Corelli," he warned. "Best to stay away from the whole painting business." "It isn't for me," I explained. I told him about the woman who'd come earlier, and after a full 2 minutes of practically begging him for information, he took the bait, and quite a lot he said. Corelli's paintings were very odd in nature. The first of her paintings had been recovered in a little house, destined to be destroyed in a place called Merchante, small enough to not have any useful information about it online, but big enough to make it a notable site. A couple of teenage explorers found the little house, entered it, found an old weathered sack, and opened it. The paintings, glorious yet wretched things, were inside. The blues had a certain aura of the sea to them. The yellows had an odd dullness, and the reds were bleeding out of the painting. The moment they touched one, the canvas of 3 teenagers on the beach, sand as yellow as where they stood, and blues that matched the color of the sea, the painting started to bleed. The trio, both in life and in art, started to bleed from their eyes, cheeks, hands, everywhere. By the time the police found them, they were unrecognizable husks of muscle and bone. The report was kept hidden away from the public due to its unfathomable nature. My friend Canopy, though, worked for the company responsible for recovering and holding the artifacts in relative safety, hidden from thought and knowledge from the rest of the world. The rest of the paintings found within the little black sack offered similar effects. A friend, though more workplace acquaintance of Canopy's, had been one of the first to recover a Corelli. There was a house across the world in Canada she and her team were sent. The couple who'd been living there were gone. Just gone. Neighbors had noted their disappearance and flagged it with the police. When the police nor higher authorities could not find a cure, and people started to go missing in the area, one by one, someone high up had the idea to call over the company. They arrived. She and her team found the artifact locked away in the heart of the house. The house had changed too, warping from the blueprint they were given to something accursed, bigger on the inside and filled with an almost artificial glow. And at the center of the house they found it, a room locked away. Inside they discovered the empty frame of a painting. One, according to sources, had been one of a house. But now this house sat on a little table, plastic, painted, and uncharacteristically childlike. Inside the dollhouse were figures and models of all who had gone missing. All were placed in the back of the rooms, faces frowned, cartoonish, and wearing clothes far too old for the time. The new dollhouse matched the interior of the shifted house. Canopy's friends seized the artifact away, throwing a net of bone silver upon it, realigning the house and neutralizing its cursed effects. The victims were never returned, forever bound to the house. "I'm just saying, Quentin," he insisted, wagging a finger. "You do absolutely do not want to mess with a Corelli." I got it, I assured. "I'll even wear silverback glass." He sighed and signed off. Silverback glass, I hoped, would be enough to shield me from the effects of the painting, had Stephen located it. For those unaware of the slang, they are glasses backed with a newly blessed silver and pressed with iron. I'd used them a few times to block out the effects of some nauseating artwork, and I hoped it would neutralize the painting the old lady wanted. The day quickly passed into the afternoon. "Stephen," I called. He came running over, notebook in hand, square glasses in the other. "Have you located to whom the face of God was sold to?" He smiled. He'd found it. "What do you know about Peyton Phillips?" I started to answer, but he continued anyway. "He's a killer, serial at best, though they never found the evidence required to convict him. And we're in luck. He owns a house just a few miles away." "Excellent," I confirmed. "I'll take Matt and Asta with us and see if we can strike a deal." I started to walk now, heading to the security/recoverance team. "Judging by recent activity, he may not be there at all," Stephen added. "The house looks decrepit, and the neighbor I talked to on Facebook." "Really, Stephen? Facebook?" I joked. "You can never trust Facebook." "Like I was saying, it looks like he hasn't been there in years," Stephen concluded. "Are we banking on dead, missing, or on the run?" A lanky man with a crew cart bro-nodded me. "I'm betting on dead," he announced. "What are we betting on?" "Matt," I greeted. I told him to fetch Asta, then told him what we were about to do. We haggled on the bonus I'd be giving them, but they agreed once I revealed to them the unlimited funding the old lady had given. I retrieved silverback glasses for the four of us, and by the hour, we were ready. Another quarter of an hour brought us into a little gated community, where I paid off the lazy security guard, parked our car in front, and observed it. Stephen was right. It didn't look like anyone had been there in years, save for maybe judging by a wide open door and the messy scene beyond the windows. Reckless hobos or worse. Stereotypical teenagers. So, what's so dangerous about this art that we've got to wear silverback? Asta pointed out. I told her it had killed 50 people more than half a century ago. She got the message. We exited the van and entered the house. The place, no offense, looked like the inside of an uncleaned vacuum cleaner. We coughed at every turn, and we also had no idea if he still had the painting or not. Still, the place was thick with dread, and the implacable fear shot at me like knives. It, by full honesty, was terrifying. I shuddered in fear, wondering what lay within. Luckily, Asta was a canary, those who had the ability to sense the things beyond normal human perception, born with an attraction to the uncanny and a desire to find and, in most cases, destroy. These also worked in the reverse reaction. A canary would be more likely to be hounded and attacked by the whimsical and weird, but Asta could put up a hell of a fight. Asta stopped us in our tracks, then pointed to a room, white door closed, yet yearning to be opened. There, she whispered. Something powerful, divinely so. Matt led the way, opening the door a crack and pointing his gun inwards. Nothing reacted, and pushed the door open. The room was a sea of endless black, despite the beating sun that had lit the entire house, and the endless void pulsed, and I saw brief shadows inside, swirling and reaching out. "What the hell?" Matt snapped. Thought it was more of an annoyance than fear. Anything that didn't immediately attack us was probably safe. A huge emphasis on probably. "There's more than one thing in there," Asta informed, reaching into the void, sensing further. 3 things. One powerful, one weak, and one something more alive than dead. Asta's face drained of color as she sensed the insides. I dragged her hand out of the void before anything could happen. Canaries were useful, yes, but more drawn to the forces of oddity. "Can we dispel this?" Stephen retrieved his tablet, signed in and went for his e-library. "I think." He swiped to a certain grimoire we'd scanned. "Yeah." He said some words I couldn't fathom, then something that started with Xanthanel and ended with Tion Anisha. Within seconds, the darkness dissipated. Stephen was a damn good assistant, yes, but he was an even better sorcerer. "Another win for the Team Auction gang." Matt cheered. We looked at him in confusion. "We really need a team name." Stephen rolled his eyes. "Let's grab the artifacts and go." We all agreed. The room was white, a clean, sterile white. Splotches of paint dotted the room, and 3 paintings sat in frames in the center, floating in place. Enchanted, I assumed. One of the 3 paintings had, by any description, exploded. This, I assumed, was the cause beyond the still wet splotches of paint. "I assume this is your doing, Stephen," Matt calmly murmured. The other man nodded. I noted the 2 frames. One was covered in cloth, and the other displayed a barren cityscape at night. Lights all but turned off. Even through the silverback, I saw shadows moving within the city, alive in artificial glory. I reached over to uncover the hidden frame. No! Asta held me back. I don't think Silverback can protect us from witnessing. She felt the thing through the frame. This. All right. I agreed. I trusted her. I went around it, checked the back, and sighed in relief as a label announced that it was indeed the face of God. I nodded to the team. We got it. Let's get back and hand it over. Leaving was easier than getting in. A feeling of relief washed over us as Matt covered the artifacts in netting, reducing, though not neutralizing its power. The drive back was peaceful, to our relief. And soon, I was handing the painted cityscape over to Stephen for storage, and meeting with the old lady in the office. Greetings, Miss. I shrugged. My name is not important. She laughed, reaching out towards the painting. I drew it back. Despite her age and her genuine tone, I had concerns for why exactly she wanted the artifact. My canary said it's a piece of great power. I raised. Something even silverback glass can't hide. Do you really want to die looking at this thing? Or is this a weapon? She smiled and dismissed her men. My reason for wanting it is genuine. Did you know? She paused, thinking. Corelli once said, those who observe the painting will be given life anew. I shook my head. No. Tell that to over 50 dead patrons. I pointed out. You know, I could just hand this over to the company. She sighed wistfully. They were not ready to behold the wonders of the painter, she murmured. But I am. Something about the way she said that seemed true. And I'm more than willing to pay for it. She snapped her fingers, and her men walked in, placing down an additional 4 briefcases, filled with money. This is a lot of money you're willing to spend on this, I commented, checking the money, one stack at a time. The dead don't have need for material concerns, she chuckled. And if I am given life anew, I will not be concerned with such finite things. Well, I sighed. At the end of the day, I don't really know anything about Corelli. So, you've got yourself a deal. I extended a hand. She shook it. Thank you, Mr. Drechenaux. I placed the painting, still covered in cloth, in a box, handed it to her, and away she went. 4 briefcases lined my offices, enough to last us a very long time. Another day at the office, perhaps. Another mission well done. I don't like it, Asta murmured, watching her leave the building. We should have sent it to the company. I handed her a stack of cash. I know you can't say no to ice cream. Still, she hesitated. I don't trust whoever the hell she is. Anyone who wants a Corelli has got to be mad. How the hell does everyone know about Corelli? I stammered, confused and bewildered. Let's just go get ice cream. Let's. Asta and I walked out, gathering the team, and walked out into the night. Another day done. Another mission complete. Perhaps the artifact would resurface. But perhaps another day, another time. Now, it was time to celebrate. For the fleeting moments of life were the ones we always took for granted. To those who fell in the Battle of Scarville, the stone memorial read, "Your sacrifices were not in vain. October 24th, 1918 to October 27th, 1918. Above the base stood a statue of an American soldier with a round cap and a long rifle with a bayonet attached. His face had a perpetual scowl. His eyes slightly squinted as the statue looked at something far off in the distance. I heard a throat clearing. I looked around in confusion. "Beautiful memorial, eh?" a voice said from behind me. I turned and saw an ancient-looking man in a suit. His face had so many wrinkles that it reminded me of a raisin. His ears and nose stood out massively on his shaking frame. I wondered just how old this man really was. "Yes, it certainly is," I admitted, glancing once more at the shining marble statue, which seemed to glow under the bright summer sun. But what is the Battle of Scarville? I've never even heard of it." The ranger shook his head sadly at this. "Most of you younger people haven't," he said gruffly. "But my family was involved in the Battle of Scarville. If you have a few minutes, I can tell you all about it." He motioned to a bench next to the statue, one that I could have sworn wasn't there just a few seconds earlier. I shrugged it off though, admitting to myself that I might have missed it due to the glare of the sun, which was slowly disappearing behind the trees. We both sat down. He told me his name was Franklin, and I told him mine was Ted. We shook hands after we had introduced ourselves, the small, bird-like bones of his fragile hand feeling almost weightless under my grasp. And then Franklin began to tell me a story that would change my life forever. "I was just a kid when this happened. My father was a soldier in the area, but he never liked to talk about what he did. Then one day, he came running into the living room, his eyes all wide, telling me and my mum to get all of our stuff, quick. It was time to go and all this other nonsense. My mother asked why. He starts screaming gibberish about monsters and this and that. And my mother says the strangest goddamn thing. Oh, is it that time again?" Right then, the shaking started outside. "Oh God, it's too late," my father said, and he put his face in his hands, crying. Now, my father was not a man who ever cried. I didn't even see him cry at my grandfather's funeral. He was made of stone, one of the toughest men I will ever know. So when he started crying, I knew something bad was happening. The sky started to go dark, as if there was a solar eclipse. My mum grabs a canvas bag and starts trying to go around the house, grabbing some food and drinks. But my dad yells, says we have no time for that. He tells her to grab his other gun, the 12 gauge in the closet upstairs. He runs downstairs and grabs his rifle, shoving a magazine in it and standing at the door, straight as a board, and as pale as a sheet. The sky seemed to go dark, even though it was still over an hour until sunset. Out of the darkness, I saw silhouettes, stumbling shapes with twisted legs, broken arms, long necks, and strange eyes. They continued forward at a much faster pace than any walking man. Their eyes seemed to glow in the dark, and the closer they got, the more hypnotized I felt. There was a strange, pulsating light that came out of their faces, you see. If you stared at it too long, you would get carried away by that light. My dad, though, didn't hesitate for a moment. He started shooting as soon as they were within range of the 30-06. The nearest one's head exploded in a shower of dark blood. The rest of them began hissing like snakes and running towards us. My dad empties his whole magazine, taking down 6 of them, then slams and locks the door. "Where's that fucking gun?" he screamed. My ma came running down the hallway with the big black thing in one hand and a box full of slugs in the other. He grabs the gun from her hand and gives it to me. "You know how to shoot, boy," he says. "Now is the time for you to prove yourself. Protect your family and home." By this point, dozens of those things are slamming on the other side of the door, still hissing and gurgling in some strange language I've never heard before. I nodded at my dad and started slamming slugs into the shotgun. They were practically breaking down the door at this point. The lock had started to bust and twist, and the door was separating from the threshold. A couple more good hits, and it would have been all over the floor anyway. I know a good slug will shoot through doors. Hell, they'll shoot through walls. So I point the shotgun at the door, point blank, and begin shooting through the door. Some of those things start screaming and falling over, dead, exit wounds the size of grapefruits in their backs and chests. But the door is in a sorry state by this point, full of massive holes and splintering apart. I had to reload, and they started busting through, coming into the house. Now that they were close, I could tell they were not human. Though from a distance they almost looked human. But they had these strange pulsating black veins going up their neck and stretching out across their face. And their eyes were all the same silver color, glowing as if they had some inner light. It wasn't just a reflection, like you see with some animals at night who run in front of your headlights. This light was coming from within them, and it was bright. Some of them had blood caked around their mouths, running down their clothes and their entire fronts of their bodies. Whose blood? I didn't know yet. But when I saw the casualties in the town later on, I would figure it out. Just when I thought we were going to be overwhelmed, my neighbor and some of his family members ran over. He starts screaming at me from the yard, firing his gun at the creatures in a frenzy of violence. He had his 2 sons with him, and they all had shotguns. They were whooping and hollering, blowing the creatures apart with buckshot. When one of them stopped to reload, the other 2 would cover them, so that they had a nearly constant rate of fire. My dad and I ran out of the door, shooting and reloading. I saw the skull of the nearest creature disintegrate as I fired into its head from less than 5 feet away. But its eyes seemed to hover in the air a moment after it was gone. It reminded me of the Cheshire cat from Alice in Wonderland. How its face seemed to hang in the air after its body had gone. By this point, we had finished off the entire group of them. A couple dozen bodies lay around us. My heart was beating, and my blood was up. I could almost relate to the sons of my neighbor. Part of me wanted to whoop and holler too. Part of it was fun and exciting, even though I knew that one wrong move would mean likely death. I used the break in the action to move closer to one of the corpses and look at it. In its basic shape, it looked human. But up close, you could tell it was no such thing. For one thing, they all had 6 fingers on each hand, and they were twisted, long things. They almost looked vampiric. And, as I would find out later, that was right on the money. Or at least, as close to it as we could understand. Their skin had thin black veins running every which way, and they all appeared to be wearing some sort of coarse brown cloth, formed into shapeless pants and shirts. They even covered their feet with it, though they had some sort of leather on the bottom. It didn't look like any leather I had ever seen. It shone and shimmered, and it looked inflexible and thick. It looked chitinous. Out in the field, we heard a sound like a screaming woman. It broke the silence and caused all of us to jump, spinning around and pointing our guns. But what we saw was no scared lady. There was some sort of animal, standing over 10 foot tall. It looked like some huge praying mantis, except its hide was shiny and black. Massive pinchers extended from the front of its face, big enough to chop a man in half down the middle, I reckon. The eyes were huge and black, but as the light moved across them, they seemed to shimmer like rainbows. "What in God's name is that?" my dad yelled. But the neighbors only shook their heads in amazement. Then one of the boys, a red-headed and skinny lad by the name of Wesley, said something that caught me off guard. "I saw one of those things coming out of the cave," he said. I looked at him, eyes wide. So did everyone else. When I was fishing earlier at the stream, I thought it was just people exploring the tunnels at first, until I saw their eyes and those veins. His father grabbed his shoulder and shook him. "When was it?" his father asked him, looking scared and uncertain. "How long ago, son?" His son shook his head slowly, trying to remember. "An hour ago, maybe," Wesley said. As soon as I saw them, I started running home, and not 5 minutes after I got there, they started coming across the yard. People from town were running down the road now, screaming in terror and pain. I saw them driven on like herds of sheep, and our giant praying mantis friend also noticed. Its head went up, antenna flicking, head cocked to the side in a way that would have been comical in any other circumstance. Its pinchers moved faster, opening and closing constantly, as if it were trying to taste the air. Then it started running. It was just a black blur in the dim light, flying across the yard at an almost impossible speed. I couldn't even see its legs moving. It grabbed the nearest person, a young woman with huge, terrified eyes, and used its pincers to snap her head clean off. The decapitated head rolled across the ground, an expression of moral terror still etched into her expression. Then the mantis creature began to suck at the bleeding stump of her neck, drinking until it looked like the body was sucking in on itself, until the skin was pale and bloodless as a mannequin. The other people were stumbling and running around it, still praying and cursing and shrieking, but it took no notice of them. Once it was full, it looked bigger, more swelled up, like a tick. Its chitinous black shell seemed to expand, looking more rounded, and it even looked a little more red in the pale light, as if the blackness of its hide had lightened into a shade of darkest crimson. "We're being invaded by vampires," I screamed. Everyone looked at me, but no one argued. They didn't even have time to. At that moment, the next wave started. Our home was on a road with houses every few 100 feet, a forest behind the houses, and a grassy field on the other side. The road itself sat between the field and the homes. The trees pressed in on the houses, being only 20 or 30 feet behind them. The woods were old and thick, with brush and prickers and endless ferns. It was hard enough to see at daytime, but it was now nearly night, and trying to see into it was a fool's errand. The enemy used our disadvantage to surprise us. We had all reloaded, of course, and we had 5 men with guns. I wished I had another one to give to my ma, who stood behind my dad. Both of them looked scared and far too pale. I saw it was the mantis creatures that were approaching, though a few of the vampires walked through slowly, their eyes glowing. The 2 apex predators didn't seem inclined to attack each other. I wondered if maybe the vampires had even domesticated the giant mantis creatures somehow. It didn't seem likely, but who knew? We started shooting as soon as they broke the boundary of the woods. The mantis creatures shrieked like dying women, emitting deafening wails as their legs, chests, and heads were blown apart by shotgun and rifle fire. But more and more kept coming, and some were now coming from the field and the road as well. We were slowly being surrounded, and our ammo was not unlimited. A vampire ran at my mother. I saw it in slow motion, the creature popping out from the grassy field and sprinting. My father was busy firing that rifle like a madman, trying to keep the mantis creatures from overtaking us. I knew it was a hopeless task, but I could at least save my ma. I raised the shotgun, the vampire only a few feet away from me now, and shot it, point blank in the face. Its head disintegrated into a mask of gore, droplets of blood flying. My mouth had been open. I was breathing hard, terrified and in the middle of battle fever, you see. And a few droplets of that strange dark blood splattered directly into my mouth. I hadn't even realized what had happened until I tasted it. It tasted nothing at all like human blood. Nothing like sucking on a cut thumb after a small injury. Nothing like the taste of a bloody rare steak. No. This blood was sweet, and somehow cloying. It was an artificial sweetness, like some fake sugar you might put in coffee, combined with a vague metallic aftertaste. I started to spit after I realized what had happened, but by that point, we were being overrun. My neighbor was ripped apart in front of me, his old weather-beaten face showing a final expression of shock and horror, as a mantis bit him across his body, right where his heart lay. Blood spurted from the wound. The mantis gingerly pushed the body parts apart and began to suck at the blood from the spurting injuries. Another followed silently behind and started feeding on the other half. I watched it all in horror, until a hand grabbed my shoulder. I spun and saw Wesley. "We need to go, now," he said, pulling me. "My dad, my ma, the others," I screamed. He shook his head. He was closest to me. As we became overrun, the creatures had split us into smaller groups. Wesley's brother and my ma and dad were on one of them. We had at least 5 mantis creatures and a few more vampires between us, as dozens more came running towards us, towards commotion and the prospect of a warm meal. I realized Wesley was right, but I fired all the same, taking down one of the mantis creatures with a slug to the torso. Its dark blood covered the dirt as it squealed and fell over, kicking its legs slowly and rhythmically like a flipped turtle as it died. My dad and Wesley's brother were still shooting. I thanked God that we each had a sack of ammo, but mine was feeling light. I looked down and saw only a dozen more slugs, maybe. They must be getting low too. I knew I would have to come back for them when things had calmed down. But for now, I fled. Wesley ran ahead of me, his coarse work clothes flapping in the wind. We sprinted across the yard. I looked back and saw one of the mantis creatures running us down, moving much faster than either of us could ever hope to run. I stopped, turning. It felt like I was facing down a charging train. I raised the gun, and with a shot to the head, I dropped it, only 10 feet away from me. It kept running for a second, a body without any brain to run it. Then it began to fall forward, sliding, its legs kicking and trembling as it died. He had shelter behind his house, apparently. There was little more than a root cellar in the backyard of his house, but it was hidden and underground. He pulled the latch on the hatchway, opening it and motioning for me to go in first. I ran forward, climbing down the short ladder. He followed, keeping the hatchway open for light while he started a gas lamp with some flint. Once we were situated, he closed the hatch. It was able to be locked from the inside and was reinforced against tornadoes, with wood and concrete forming the walls. We also had some supplies down there, water and jars of pickled foods and jerky. Not much variety, but it would do. We stayed down there for 2 days. When we came back up, the creatures were gone. They had even taken their dead with them. I didn't know where they had gone, though I assumed it was back into the caves. They had left our dead, however. Countless bodies lay all around the surrounding towns. I saw endless dead in the downtown area when I went down there, and I never saw my dad or ma again. I never even found their bodies. Perhaps they had been dragged off into the woods, Or perhaps the creatures took a few bodies back with them, maybe as souvenirs, or just for some fresh meat. All of the people who died in the Battle of Scarville were reported as casualties from the Great War, or the Spanish flu. But those of us who were there know what we saw, and these were no flu victims. Thousands of bodies around the town had all the blood drained from them. I wonder why those creatures from underground didn't keep going. After all, they had won the Battle of Scarville, which was really just more of a massacre. But then I thought about how deer hunters are only allowed to hunt so many per season, to allow their population to regrow every year. And I thought about those abominations under the earth. And I wondered if maybe, just maybe, they might not be doing the same to us. Waiting for the human population to grow for 100 years or so. Then, when the population is fat and healthy and lazy, come back out to feed on the herd. The old man stopped, clearing his throat and looking over at me. His story had apparently come to an end. He smiled slightly at me, but I kept looking at him suspiciously, waiting for some sort of punchline. You realize how insane that whole story sounds? I asked, after a few moments. The old man with his withered face just grinned at me, and in the dying light of the setting sun, I could have sworn his eyes were glowing. In 2017, my roommate was busted for drug paraphernalia. To make matters worse, the bust happened on the landlord's property, so even though no charges were placed on me, I was evicted. Money was already tight, so without my roommate's contribution to rent, I would have had to move out anyway. But now I only had 3 days to find a place to stay. And living in a rural area, my options were limited. There was only one other small apartment complex, and their rates were twice as high. However, I did find a newly listed rental only 5 miles away. It looked like an old barn that had been renovated and turned into a vertical duplex. The listing said both floors were vacant, but only showed pictures of the bottom floor. It was shabby, but I had no room to complain. I called the owner, a sweet-sounding old man with a thick southern drawl, and reserved the bottom floor. The next day I collected the few possessions I had and drove over to the farmstead. The old man was waiting for me at the main house. He looked like what I had imagined. Dirty jeans, old boots, a big belly and a long grey beard that matched his cotton shirt. I parked and headed over to greet him.
Howdy.
He nodded at me as I walked over to him. Hello, I answered, forcing any ounce of charisma I could muster into my tone. I'm Melissa. Your property is beautiful. He extended his hand.
Eli, and thank you.
I dropped my bags to welcome his handshake.
She's not what she used to be, but she's home.
He knelt to grab my bags. Oh, you don't need to do that. It's not that much, I told him, but he shook his head and picked them up anyway.
Where you're staying is around back.
he said as he started to walk that way.
Sorry, but I don't have a driveway over to it yet. You're welcome to drive around and park in the grass if you'd like.
There was no way my beater could drive through the tall grass. That's all right. I don't mind walking. The duplex was less than 50 yards away from the main house, and there was a worn path through the tall grass to get there. It was vertically symmetrical, with the windows in the same places for the first and second floor. The second floor window looked to not have any glass. It looked smaller than in the photos, but I was looking forward to the serenity of nighttime on a farm. He unlocked the front door and flipped the lights on. It smelled of hay, manure, and wood, something I would have to get used to. To my right, there was an old tube TV on a cabinet with a dusty recliner pointed at it. Behind that was the bathroom, and behind that was the bedroom. The kitchen was along the back wall. To my left was a ladder leading right up to a hatch in the ceiling. "What's that?" I asked Eli, pointing at the ladder.
That's the way upstairs for now. I'll be adding a door and steps upstairs to the back of the place eventually. Just haven't gotten round to it.
He dropped my bags in the center of the room.
Don't worry. No one else is living here yet, and I don't plan on renting the upstairs out until I've finished the other entrance.
That's okay, I said as I continued to look around the space. Did you just turn this into a living space recently?
Oh no,
he answered.
My granddad turned his place from a barn into a house many years ago. For some distant cousins. Twins, apparently. I didn't know any of them very well. I just inherited this place a couple of years ago.
Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss, I said, but he shook his head.
Nah, I wasn't very close to my folks after 18.
He huffed.
I wasn't much into farming, but as I've gotten older, the more appealing it's been. My parents worked tirelessly to try and keep this farm as big and profitable as my granddad did, but they struggled. Since I had made a small farm of my own, I thought that when I inherited this place, that I could make it work. But I've struggled just like they did. That's why I'm renting out the place,
he said as he shrugged. I'm sure running a farm is incredibly difficult, especially by yourself.
Well,
he paused. He looked around the room a bit before continuing.
It wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for something messing with my crops and killing livestock.
Oh, he looked at me.
Now, I don't mean to scare you. I'm sure it's just a few coyotes, and the livestock are all the way past the house on the other side.
His attempt to comfort me was appreciated, but I was starting to feel like this was a mistake. I would stay there for as long as I had to, but I'd continue looking elsewhere. I guess that was a positive of renting from this man, as there was no contract, and I just paid every month. I'm sure it's fine, I said, trying to match his affirmation.
I don't have much of any livestock anymore, just a couple cattle and a few chicks, so I don't think it should be much of an issue.
He handed me the key and stepped out the front door.
If you need anything, just call me, or come knocking. Don't be shy.
Thank you very much, I told him as he walked back to his house. I walked around the space a bit, before unpacking my bags and accustoming myself to my new home. That evening, I sat in the recliner and browsed on my phone for other places to stay. I looked for hours, expanding the boundary further and further away, but couldn't find anywhere I could afford. I even contemplated posting online for roommates, but after getting evicted due to the last one and the thought of living with a stranger, I would just as rather risk being eaten by the coyotes. It had gotten late, and I could already start to smell the dew on the grass outside. When I got up to go to bed, the floor creaked loudly with every step. It sounded like the entire house groaned for every move I made. I didn't remember the house being this noisy earlier. But perhaps the silence of the evening made it that much more noticeable. I made my way to bed, but hardly slept. The next morning, as I walked back to my car, I saw Eli carrying a shovel over to the barn. I waved to him, but he must not have seen me. He disappeared inside and I left for work. When I returned that evening, Eli was sitting on the porch smoking. He nodded to me as I got out of my car. "Hello," I called over to him. I could tell he had had just as long a day as I did. "Long day."
"Same as always,"
he said and smiled.
"Does misery love company?"
I laughed. "Indeed it does," I answered. I walked over to him and we talked for an hour or so about our lives, growing up, and how we got to where we are. He was sweet and genuine, listening intently and sharing his own stories. It was exactly what we needed. "So, am I the first person to stay here?" I asked.
"Actually, I had one other lady stay here before you. She was probably about your age. She didn't stay very long, though. We had a bit of an argument early on."
"Dear, what happened?" I asked.
"Well, she had rented out the bottom floor, but she had let her sister stay on the top floor without talking to me first."
He sighed.
"I should have just let it go, since I'm still not ready to rent that top floor out. But it just seemed poor manners. I brought it up to her kindly at first, and she just kept denying it. But I would see them both, standing at the windows together, one in the bottom and one in the top window, staring at me. I saw them several times over the course of a couple of weeks, doing just that."
He sighed again.
"They were odd ones."
"That's definitely rude," I replied. "I don't blame you." He smiled at me.
"Well, it's late. It's about time we go to bed."
He got up and headed inside.
"Good night,"
he called out as he closed the door behind him. "Good night," I answered as I walked around the house and back to the duplex. As I stepped inside, I noticed the loud creaking again. With each step, a squeak echoed around the house. It took me walking to the bedroom to notice that each creak under my feet sounded again, right above me. I rocked back and forth to make sure I was hearing it right, and with each shift, the thud echoed upstairs. Was someone up there? I wondered. "Hello?" I called out, but no one answered. Was the sister still living up there? I tiptoed over to the ladder, each squeak upstairs matching my steps. No, It must be something with how this place was constructed, I assured myself. I stared up at the hatch, contemplating taking a peek. Maybe it's best I wait until morning. I sat in the recliner that night, staring at the ladder. I may have dozed off a time or two, but it was another night of poor sleep. I didn't see Eli in the morning, or I would have asked him to investigate the second floor for me. I went off to work, but left early to check out the second floor before it got too dark. When I came back, Eli was back near the barn with a shovel, covered in dirt and sweat. I waved at him again, but he didn't see me. When I got to the duplex, I stepped around a few times to see if the creaks were echoing upstairs, but they weren't anymore. I turned on my phone's flashlight and climbed the ladder. I found the light switch and flicked it on. The second floor was identical to the first floor. Everything was exactly the same, except for the missing window pane in the front of the house, adjacent to the ladder. I crept over to the kitchen to see if there was anything to cover the window with, but all of the drawers were empty. Then I noticed the bedroom door was closed. I tried to open it, but the door was locked. "Hello?" I called out as I knocked on the bedroom door, but no response. If someone had been living on the second floor, they didn't have any belongings. The only way out that I wouldn't notice would be the open window, but there would be no way back in without a ladder. They might have been sneaking in and out midday while I was at work, but surely Eli would have seen an intruder. I went back downstairs to find something to cover the window with. Despite how late it was, I decided to call Eli to ask him about the upstairs bedroom. I found a spare sheet under the bed as Eli picked up.
"Hello?"
"Hey, Eli, it's Melissa. I'm sorry to bother you so late, but I was checking out the second floor and noticed the bedroom door up there is locked. Is there a reason?" He grumbled a bit to make it more obvious I had woken him up.
"Huh? There's no lock on the bedroom doors."
I froze for a moment, then pressed one foot down. The creak echoed upstairs, just like the night before. I took another step, and it echoed again.
"Good night,"
Eli said as he hung up the phone. I froze. The only sound I could hear was the crickets outside. I dropped the sheet and sprinted towards the kitchen. The thuds and creaks I made were equally matched above. I grabbed a knife from the drawer and ran to the ladder. Again, every thump matched me in step. I climbed up and put my hand on the trapdoor, pausing for a moment to prepare myself, before bursting through. There was no one. I rocked back and forth, listening to the creaks coming from below my feet and above my head. Then I stomped a couple of times, and it echoed loudly, but it still sounded like it was coming from above. It must just be how this place is constructed, how the sound bounces around, or how the frame moves, I told myself. But then I noticed the bedroom door was open. I took a couple of steps towards the bedroom and peered inside. Empty. Strange, but I was relieved. I guess the door opened when I was stomping around. My phone rang. It was Eli. "Hello?" I answered.
What are you doing?
He asked. I was just looking around upstairs. There were some noises and the bedroom door opened, so I... But he cut me off.
No,
he said.
Why are you on the roof?
What? I replied.
What are you doing on the roof? Why are you stomping on it?
I froze again. My mind raced. I stared at the open window above the ladder. Are you in your room? I asked. I couldn't see the house through the window at the angle I was at, so he shouldn't have been able to see me.
Of course. I was in bed,
he answered. I raised my hand and waved.
Yes, hello,
Eli said.
I see you.
I dropped my knife and jumped down the hatch. I grabbed my keys, got in my car, and never went back. I left the few things I had behind. Eli called me the next day and insisted I answer him as to why I was on the roof. I tried explaining that it wasn't me, that someone or something else lived there, but he wouldn't listen. Before we got off the phone, he asked me why there was blood and feathers in the upstairs bedroom. I don't know, I answered. But I don't think you have coyotes. I don't think the woman who lived there before me had a sister. And I don't think your cousin had a twin. You know the drill. Stifled yawns, heads bobbing on screens, eyes as glazed as donuts. Each minute stretching out like taffy while your whole life is suspended. And you wonder, are they really still talking? The droning speaker's voice takes on the quality of the Charlie Brown teacher. Where? Huh. Saying that now, that kind of reminds me of a baby crying. That also works, since it's how I feel. I'm in Zoom hell, and I don't know how to log off. Is it bad that I forgot what the meeting's about? I have no clue what these graphs mean. I messaged Donna in the chat. What's this meeting about anyway? She replies, no idea, tuned out ages ago. Lol. Classic Donna. Not sure what the hell I should do. I have some vague sense that soon they're going to spotlight me and I'll be having to explain my portion of these numbers. I sit up straighter and try to pay attention, but it all swims in my vision. I've been staring at this screen so long. When did this meeting start? The fact that I can't remember should alarm me. But with time just dripping out into eternity, I can't find enough motivation to cut through the molasses of the monotony. Unfortunately, the work screens don't allow us to open up YouTube, Google, social media, porn. The only windows I can open are Pong. Seriously. Now I know I'm in Zoom hell. And Reddit. Pong just makes me think of the fact that a clump of brain cells in a petri dish were trained in a lab to play. It tells you exactly how much brain power is needed. The fact that I've been playing anyway tells you exactly how bored I am. The fact that I am now insanely good tells you exactly how long I've been stuck in this fucking meeting. As for Reddit, I'm guessing it's not allowed, but some admin mistakenly left it on my screen, and I sure as hell am not letting them know. You see, I'm documenting this meeting, recording my own version of minutes to save off my brain's zombification. Not that anyone will ever hear said meeting minutes. Posting to Reddit would definitely get me booted. But, heck, I have to do something to pass the time, while these bobbleheads drone on about security protocols and the ethics of the project. Yawn. No, that's right. That's also why I shouldn't post this recording. This meeting I'm in is confidential, which is why we're not allowed access to the outside world. Apparently it has to do with some super secret project about stuff I can't disclose to you normies. Sure, we'll go with that. Definitely because secret, and not because I have no fucking clue. Not sure how someone like me even got pulled into this meeting, but go me. I just hope they don't expect me to. So, suddenly my screen was spotlighted. I minimized the Reddit window just in time, and everyone saw I'd been playing Pong like the professional I am. While I'm sitting there, trying to figure out how to cover up my obvious dicking around, a slideshow pops up. Diagrams about alpha wave spikes and numbers pulled from out of my digital arse, I guess. And I know what none of this shit means. And oh god, I haven't prepped to present. I've had nightmares about exactly this scenario, I'm telling you. Well, not exactly this. In my nightmare, it was porn on my screen, not Pong. And then, whatever digital deity rules the Zoomiverse took mercy on me as one of the hosts prompted. Let's start with introductions. Go ahead. Hi, I said. I'm Dev. It's great to be here. The chat populated with encouraging messages. Great to have you with us, Don. Awesome, Don. Don, you the man. Yay, Don. Welcome. Glad you're here. Huh. Clearly no one cared that I'm actually Dev. Don is just the name I got stuck with when I joined the meeting, and never bothered to change it. But hey, welcome to the Zoom, Don. The panic that was like a tsunami flooding my every synapse receded, dying down as the introductions passed on to the next participant. In true Zoom fashion, most of my fellow participants can't actually get past this part, because they don't know how to unmute themselves. The hosts spend laborious minutes issuing directions, only to get garble or static. And then you have some folk who clearly aren't paying attention at all, babbling to themselves or to others off screen. One person does nothing but giggle creepily. A jillion years later, introductions are finally over, and I'm starting to sweat again about my upcoming presentation. But no, we're not there yet. First comes the icebreaker. What is your favorite color? Green is the popular choice. I'm tempted to respond pizza, just to stave off the monotony, before the last dregs of my soul wither into the ether. But, being the consummate professional I am, I say blue. Awarded with cheers like I've just successfully resolved the conflict between quantum mechanics and general relativity. Yep, Consider the ice broken. You're welcome. But for real, what is the point of this meeting? So, there's this other Don, with 2 N's. Other Don is, well, I don't really know him, but he was one of the participants to introduce himself after me. I could have sworn he said a different name though. But when it came to his turn to break the ice, Don's screen came up as blank. The hosts kept asking if he'd accidentally muted himself. And then suddenly, there he was. Face covered in blood, sockets where his eyes should be, screaming and screaming, like something straight out of a horror flick. His shriek split my skull like the volume was dialed up to the max, and there was nothing I could do to turn it down or turn him down. That scream reverberated through all the channels of my mind. Suddenly it silenced, and there was just the image of him screaming without sound. Somehow this was even more disturbing. And then Don showed up in the chat. Donors, get out. You're in hell. Disconnect. Don't let them keep you in hell. 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 The word hell repeated endlessly, scrolling. And then suddenly, Don was just gone. Just gone. The deathly silence after that terrified me. I don't know why. I mean, he got booted from the meeting. So he left the Zoom. So what? Why am I so disturbed? I've started noticing the other participants. I was too disengaged to pay attention before, but now I'm realizing all the faces are distorted. I can't actually see anyone, just vague impressions. And some of them are like Don, muted, but screaming and screaming until they get booted. I private messaged Donna, the co-worker I chatted to earlier, but she's not here anymore. It bothers me that I don't know whether she got booted or left by herself. We still haven't gotten to the purpose of the meeting. Instead, it's been round after round of security questions. What's your favorite pastime? What's your favorite food? What's the name of your first pet? I'm guessing these are to verify our identities. I jokingly asked if they're trying to break into my bank account, but the hosts ignored my sarcasm. So I offered my scripted answers. But, how much proof do they need of my identity? How many of me do they think there are? Not everyone can answer the questions. A surprising number of participants drop out. Maybe the dropouts have the right idea. The most recent question, what are my parents' names, really got to me. I can't remember their names. I'm drawing a complete blank, which isn't normal. It just shows how far this endless Zoom has blitzed my brain. I type into the chat. Need a quick break. Before anyone can stop me, I leave my screen. Shit. There's nothing outside my screen. No hallway or cubicles or offices. There's no anything. Literally nothing exists outside the Zoom. I don't even know how to describe what happens when I try to step away from my screen. There's just a great big void of nothing. You know how when you're dreaming, there's stuff that exists around you, but it's only whatever your consciousness sees right in the moment. Like, maybe you try to read a newspaper in your dream, and when you're looking at the paper, garbled letters might form. But when you look away, they're not there anymore, because your brain just jumps around. What I'm experiencing is sort of like that. The only thing that exists for me is the Zoom. And in that Zoom, the only interference I have that might be connected with reality is the window to Reddit. I almost ask if anyone else has found Reddit, but a sudden primal fear snaps every synapse. What if the hosts notice and cut off the only link I have to the outside world? The meeting is still going, and I'm terrified. I've tried and tried, but I can't remember how I logged into this Zoom. I'm taking my minutes much more seriously. Here are some of the snippets I'm hearing. Ethical implications of donor brains. Steps on the ladder of progress toward full mind uploading. Training organoid intelligence to compute. Biocomputing to produce partial mind emulation. But the voices are all garbled, like the input isn't clear. Like it's just bits and pieces of background noise, picked up by the mic. I do remember one key sentence though. If there is any consciousness developed from the scans, its subjective experience might incorporate elements of recent memory into a simulated, dreamlike reality. Did Don understand what was going on? Did Donna? Why were we all automatically assigned the same sort of name when logging in? Is Don short for something? Donor? My real name is Dev. Only now I'm not even sure how true that is. Some of the identity verification questions have stumped me. I've had to lie, and then the host prompt, "Really? You're married? Are you sure?" "No, I'm not sure." So I backtrack. "Well, I wish I was, but no, I'm single." So far they seem convinced that I am who I say I am. But who is that? I remember that I'm a dog person, that I drink black coffee, that I like video games. I remember that I'm an organ donor, was an organ donor, and that I happily signed up to donate my body to science after I shuffle off this mortal coil, since I don't believe in any afterlife. But there's also so much I don't know. Like my parents' names, my birthday, my best friend. Truthfully, I don't even remember my actual favorite color. Oh God, what if it's green? I only said blue because it was the first color that came to mind. The last image in my memory is twisted blue metal and shards of glass and blood, and a steering wheel. I have a vague notion that I used to commute in a car that shade of electric blue. But I was driving distracted, tuned into a Zoom meeting on my phone, looking at the screen and concentrating on the presentation I'd been called on to give, instead of paying attention to traffic. I think I have to share these minutes. Okay, here goes. People of the internet. God, no, that sounds cheesy. Okay, trying again. Hi folks. If you're reading these minutes, then you know I'm trapped in a nightmare, simulation, Zoom meeting, actual hell. I could use some help distinguishing here. Help. I have no connection to reality except you. Please help me to wake up from this endless Zoom. Once I post this, I'm scared the hosts will notice and close the only window I have looking out. In fact, I'm pretty certain. So before that happens, please, I need to know what happened to me. I need to know what is real. If nothing else, if you can tell me nothing else before I'm closed off from this window entirely, then please, just answer one question for me. Should I disconnect? I don't know what to do. In the past 72 hours, my life has been turned upside down. Our family has been thrown into chaos. My wife is missing, and I fear she'll never return. Let me start from the beginning. My wife and I started playing hide and seek with our 2 young kids. However, they're a little too young to hide effectively. They always hide in the same spot, every time. So we found it's much more fun for one of us parents to hide, and then the rest of us seek. I've hidden from my wife and kids just by standing completely still in the corner of a dark room. It's amazing how our brains are programmed to see things that move. My wife gets a little more creative, but it's hard for us to do anything too elaborate, because the kids are not very cooperative in waiting for us to hide. On Tuesday evening, after work, we decided to play. My wife decided to hide first. I counted down from 10 with the kids holed up in the downstairs office. Ready or not, here I come. The kids bounded out of the room like wild dogs. I followed, slowly, trying to get a sense of where my wife was hiding. I'd often try to figure out what room she was hiding in first, to gently guide the kids so that we wouldn't find her too soon, or spend too long looking for her. I saw her when I entered the living room. She was crouched behind the couch. I could see a bit of her elbow poking out from the upholstery. The kids walked right past her, too intent on checking the kitchen. I waited for them to return. As they walked back in and rounded the couch, I waited for them to squeal in delight. Except they didn't. Confused, I approached the couch. She wasn't there. Maybe I'd just seen her tag or something poking out. Or maybe she'd moved from her hiding spot. Wouldn't be the first time. As I said, she's more creative at this than I am. So we moved on. We checked all the usual spots. Underneath the shelving in the garage, behind the kitchen door, even in the lower kitchen cabinets. She wasn't in any of those spots. Maybe she went upstairs. I hadn't heard her go upstairs, but she can creep around pretty quietly. I walked along the hallways, the kids in tow. "Jessie," I called, in a sing-song voice. "We're going to find you." Gotcha. Our bedroom door was open, and there was a long, Jess-shaped lump under the covers. "Let's check Mum and Dad's bedroom," I said to the kids, pattering footsteps as they charged behind me. I reached for the light switch, flicked on the lights, then grabbed the hem of the comforter and yanked it off. My heart dropped. The bed was empty. I stared down in confusion. It must have just been bunched up weirdly, but I could have sworn it looked like a person under there. The rough shape of someone in a fetal position, legs bent, back curved. I backed out of the room. The kids and I went downstairs. "Jess," I called out. "We can't find you. Come on out." Nothing. The kids lost interest. They bounded into the family room and began playing with their cars. I was about to call out to her again, when I noticed the chain of the basement door lock was disengaged. Aha. As I approached, my heart hammered in my chest. I knew she was waiting on the other side, waiting to jump out at me and give me a heart attack. She'd done that before. I took a deep breath and swung open the door. She wasn't there. Damp air wafted up from the basement. I clicked on the light. "Jess?" I called out. No answer. "The kids aren't playing anymore," I called down. "And you shouldn't be hiding down there anyway. These stairs are too dangerous." Nothing. I turned, about to close the door, but then something caught my eye. Black hair, poking through the gap between the stairs, about halfway down. She's hiding under the stairs. I stepped down. The wood creaked under my weight. The hair glistened below me in the dim yellow light. I continued down the steps, avoiding stepping on her hair, until I was standing on the concrete floor. I whirled around. Aha! But the space under the stairs was empty. My blood ran cold. "Jess, this isn't funny," I shouted. "Stop playing games with me." A footstep sounded behind me. I whipped around. The naked bulb in the ceiling only lit half the basement. The other half, where we had rows and rows of storage boxes, was in near total darkness. But I squinted, trying to make it out. In the murky darkness, behind a stack of boxes, in the corner, I thought I could see her standing there. I could only see her in my peripheral vision, like how you can only see dim stars when you're not looking right at them, because of how your optic cells are arranged. I focused on one of the storage boxes, really stared at it, and when I did, I realized I could see her pale calves, extending up into the darkness. And as I stood there, I realized I could hear her breathing. "I can see you there," I said, my voice wavering. "Why are you being so weird? The kids aren't even playing anymore. So come out. Please." Deep in the pit of my stomach, I knew there was something wrong. Something horribly wrong. So I chickened out. "I'm going upstairs. You can join me when you're ready." I headed for the stairs. But halfway there, the bulb flickered and went out. Total darkness surrounded me. I stretched my hands out, blindly groping into the darkness. They only fell on empty air. I frantically poured through the air, searching for something, anything. My fingers caught in something. Hair. I screamed and yanked my hands back. Then I ran blindly into the darkness. But something glanced off me. I shoved at it. I heard a dull thwack. And then I kept running. The side of the banister caught me straight in the chest. Panting, I felt my way to the stairs and climbed them as fast as I could. Then I locked the door to the basement and frantically ran to my kids. They were fine, but as I hugged them, I couldn't get the horrible thought out of my mind. The hair I'd felt, it was higher than my eye level, about 6.5 feet off the ground. Jess is only 5'2". The police searched the entire house. My wife isn't here. They searched the backyard and patrolled in a 3-mile radius. They came up empty-handed. It's like she disappeared off the face of the earth. Except last night, as I rolled over in bed, I swear my fingers touched something warm. The one thing I could probably live without, and I won the grand prize. I enter a lot of competitions like these. The only other times I had won something was £5 off at a local restaurant and a raffle at a Christmas fair. I won a life-size chocolate Santa for that raffle. It was actually really nice, high-quality chocolate. I don't remember entering this paperclip competition, but me and my friends do dumb things when we're drunk sometimes. Entering a stupid competition didn't seem out of the realm of possibilities. It started when I received a single envelope, full of paperclips. There were easily 100, at least. Probably more. You can imagine my confusion when I opened the first one. No letter inside, only paperclips. Red, green, blue, yellow, pink, black and white. It almost looked like something you'd sprinkle onto a cake as they poured down to my feet, pitter-pattering on the wooden hall floor. I rolled my eyes and cleaned up. I figured an office had put the wrong address for a supply delivery. One shipment of 100 paperclips is odd. But 2? That's where I got suspicious. The second day they had me question whether this was some form of prank. I was smarter this time though. I recognized the weight and feel of the envelope. I recognized the outline of paperclips as I held it up to the light. I didn't let them spill out at my feet, although my curiosity still had me open it to peek inside. You'd do the same. Is it really just paperclips? Yes. Yes, it is. By the 5th day, I had stopped opening it. I'd just briefly hold it up to the light to confirm the outline looked like paperclips, and then I'd toss it. I don't remember why I checked my spam folder in my emails, but when I took a look, I immediately saw it. The cheesy headline stood out. Clippity-clop, you've won the lifetime paperclip jackpot. The rest of the email went like this. Your luck has just clipped right into place. Congratulations. You are the grand winner of our lifetime supply of paperclips. From now on, you can proudly say goodbye to those chaotic loose papers and let our high-quality paperclips take over. No more sacrificing yourself to paper cuts. And guess what? You didn't just win a box. You won an entire lifetime of daily paperclip surprises. You've really hit the jackclip. Starting from next week, you will receive a random amount of our finest top-notch paperclips every single day. Just imagine the possibilities. Office organization, arts and crafts, creative paperclip sculptures. The list is never ending. With your new paperclip friends by your side, there's no end to the horizon of tidiness and creativity, to the max. Just like our paperclips, durable, strong, and cliptacular. As we ship your first batch, let us get you started by sharing some mind-blowing paperclip fun facts. I'll save you the fun facts section, as it's not very fun. Although I did learn that they've been around since the 1800s. The only interesting thing that this email gave me was a company name, Clipogenics. I promptly sent an email back, asking that my prize be transferred to someone else. My exact words were, someone more in need of paperclips. Although, thinking about it, I'm not sure who that could possibly apply to. Spoiler alert. They did not reply, and the envelopes kept on coming. 2 weeks went by. I was still receiving paperclips. 6 weeks went by. Nothing changed. A few weeks ago was the 3-month mark. Over 90 days of paperclips. Yes, I had considered selling them, but I really don't know how much money I could make. Also, yes, they even arrived on Sundays. I could not understand who was delivering these. I never caught them, although I assumed the person posting them had no association with the company themselves. So talking to them is never something I attempted. Around that 3-month mark, I was going through my normal daily routine. Make a cup of coffee, pick up the envelope from the hallway floor, hold it up against the light, and toss it in the bin. Only this time, the light revealed the outline of one single paperclip, and something else. I have to admit, deep down, part of me was almost excited. A real-life plot twist, something to spice up an otherwise mundane part of my day. Curveballs are usually exciting to me, and this was no exception. I reached inside, pulling the mystery object out. What could they possibly have sent me? A severed finger. A dry, almost slightly green, severed finger. I'm not sure which happened first, my scream or dropping the finger to the floor. I noticed only then that the paperclip was lodged under the fingernail, piercing right through the flesh. It was golden this time, a color I had not been sent before. I'd like to say I stayed calm, but I didn't. I ran to the bathroom to throw up. I contacted the police, and they took the finger and envelope away. I explained everything that I knew, and showed them the email. They told me that they'd investigate. It's crazy, isn't it? One of the police officers began his thought to me. What? How dangerous simple production can be. Some poor sod lost his finger over something as simple as a paperclip. You think it was an accident? I don't know what exactly I thought it was. A threat, maybe. I'm still not sure. The police officer replied, "Of course, Probably someone on the production line packaging these things. Finger gets caught in machinery. Ah, no, whoops. And before you know it, it's the finger lost. The weight of the finger makes the machine think the envelope is now full of paperclips, and off it goes to your door. Somehow, a calm explanation of this situation actually helped me. Hell, it almost convinced me that it was just normal. I was assured, though, that the company was at fault for health and safety, and that something would be done about this. A couple of weeks went by, and the police hadn't contacted me with any new information. The envelopes kept coming daily, but I was too afraid to open them. For fear of tossing away evidence, though, I kept them piled up in the corner. As the pile grew taller, I decided to bite the bullet and open them, but not before carefully inspecting each one. My hands shaking, I held the first up to the light, and it was just full of paperclips. Perhaps the incident really was a one-off, and the fault had been fixed. I held a few more up, and my heart almost skipped a beat when I found one with a solid shadow. No outline of paperclips. This envelope had a letter. I carefully opened it up and read. Dear valued customer, we would like to formally apologize for the incident that occurred recently. We understand that the events were likely traumatic, and whilst we may never make it right, we'd like to offer you a one-time compensation. Attached to this letter, using one of our sturdy, high-end paperclips, we have written a check for £2,000. We hope we can continue our partnership professionally. We understand that you may want to cancel your lifetime supply of paperclips. Unfortunately, we must decline this request. We hope you understand. Clipogenics Customer Service Team. No, I did not understand. Do you? Do you understand what the fuck they're talking about? I contacted the police to update them, letting them know that I had received this message. They sent somebody to collect it. The following day, assuming all was well, I picked up the daily delivery from the floor. Before I had a chance to check it, there was a knock at the door. I folded the envelope and put it in my back pocket. I opened the door and was surprised to see a man in a suit, looking very concerned. He wasted no time in getting to the point.
Hello, we're relocating you. Pack your things and tell nobody. We have a temporary hotel booked for you.
My lack of a response showed that I had many questions.
Look, it's just precautionary. We can't find any evidence of clipogenics ever existing. And
what?
And the finger matched the DNA of a recent assumed suicide. It's now assumed to be murder.
I had a feeling there was more. Unfortunately, his next sentence confirmed that.
The person in question was found to have also won the competition.
I did not need telling twice. I got my essentials packed and was at the hotel in less than 90 minutes. It was only in the next town over, which I found odd, yet comforted me that I was still so close to home. After the man left, and I was left with my own thoughts, I was surprised at how quiet my head was. I was just content. I wasn't happy or sad or scared. I was just existing. Perhaps I was still in shock. It took about an hour before I remembered the envelope in my back pocket. I held it up to the light and knew from the resulting darkness that this contained another letter. I hesitantly opened it, peeking inside to check for hidden surprises. Upon taking it out, I thought it to be a blank piece of paper. It seemed entirely empty, until I unfolded it to reveal the few words printed upon this letter. Dear valued customer, suicides don't lose fingers. The police do not wear suits. The world spun. The world crumbled. The world felt like it no longer existed. Then all at once, reality came back to me, as I felt a rush of anxiety-driven energy. I paced back and forth in the limited space I had, weighing up my options and trying to come up with a plan. Could I leave? I was probably being watched. Could I contact the police? I certainly no longer felt comfortable doing so. Could I talk to my friends or family? The last thing I wanted was to put them in danger. I knew I had to do one of these three options, and opted for the first. It was still bright out. Surely I'd be safe in crowds. So that's exactly what I did. I stuck to busy areas and travelled across the country, using as many different types of public transportation as I could. I didn't stop until night fell. I booked a new hotel under a fake name and paid in cash. I rested surprisingly well that night. My sleep was interrupted at around 7 a.m. to someone knocking at the door. No, thank you. I sleepily yelled at what I assumed to be the room service. Something arrived in reception for you. I'll slide it under the door. A white envelope emerged through the crack under the door. I wanted to stay away from it, but I knew that being unaware of the contents would scare me more than anything else. Feeling my heart pounding through my chest, I reached for the envelope, noticing a thick object within. Another finger? No. A letter. This time with a vial of liquid and 2 golden paperclips. Dear valued customer, we're glad you're settling in well to your new surroundings. Sorry for the little show. We needed to assure that you'd get as far away from your hometown as possible. Your true prize isn't the paperclips. That would be mundane. Your true prize is immortality. Paperclips are beautiful, aren't they? Connecting paper to paper as the universe connects life to life. And as the flow of life continues, it has connected us to you. The chain of our will continues, as the chain of paperclips continues with it. The vial within has a unique purpose. It will kill you and help you live, all at the same time. You do understand, don't you? Drink the vial and stab a paperclip into yourself. You will slowly drift away for a moment, but you will stay connected to the universe. You must. You will awaken in your new body, one of the many that we have cryogenically frozen here. It worked for me. You saw my finger. Every single paperclip we have sent you has had a purpose. Each has been blessed with a new connection for your new life. They have all been through your home. Many have touched your skin, and all have been held up to the light. Their blessings will reach you in your new life. The green ones bring you wealth, The red ones bring you health. The blue ones bring you happiness. All you have to do is drink the vial. Before the poison sets in, choose a paperclip. Your decision will always be the right one. We know how your brain ticks. Every word we've ever written and every color we've ever chosen have all been designed to sway your decision in this very moment. You'll fall asleep as a valued customer, but you'll awaken as our valued employee. I am not letting them control my destiny. I will not sacrifice my life to their company, to become one of their puppets to control. I know this company has a far greater reach than I first understood, so I might not be able to tell anybody. But I can tell everybody. I just hope this reaches their next big winner. And I hope they are as strong-willed as I am. It's said that we each think ourselves as the protagonists of our own stories. Take that too far, and you get narcissistic people who annoy everyone around them. But there is another layer to it. In the end, we all experience the world through our own eyes, and what we see is always limited. Don't get what I mean? Imagine for a second that you were living in a simulation. Now, you may think that it's nearly impossible for a computer to possibly synthesize everything in the world going on around you. Imagine walking into a bookstore. Have you ever actually read every single book in there? No. Leave that. Have you ever even opened each book? How do you know that each book is real? That each book actually has words in it without you opening each one? They could very well just be placeholders, there to make the world look more real. Extrapolate that to the world. Sure, there are ways of knowing about everything going on around you, but how much of that do you actually experience? In the end, of course, it's only what we experience that shapes what we think of reality. We can never go inside someone else's head. This would all just be a thorough experiment. Or at least, it would be normally. 2 weeks ago, I moved into a new town. I didn't really relish the idea, as it was a rather small town, a far cry from the city I'd grown up in. But I had come here as a part of a job, and my student loans weren't going to pay themselves. I sighed and grit myself for 6 months of utter boredom. That's what I thought would happen. I settled in well enough, only for my doorbell to ring the very afternoon I had arrived. I hadn't been expecting that. I hadn't even unpacked half of the boxes yet. It was my neighbor. At least, that was how they introduced themselves. It was Gary, his wife, and his twin daughters. They were nice enough. Though, overall, given that I was eager to get to work, they were more of a distraction than anything. The visitors didn't stop though. The mailman, other neighbors from down the street, the owner of the local grocery store, the garbage man. All of them felt the need to ring on my doorbell, just to say hello to me. I wouldn't have minded, but the thing was that the conversations dragged on for far longer than they ever should have. And now that I truly think about it, there was something really off about each of those conversations. I know the uncanny valley effect is regarding faces, but it was like that, except for speech. What was being said was normal, but there was an oddness to it that I couldn't really put my finger on. As if I was thinking, wait a moment, real people don't talk like this. I just chalked it all up to small town values and went to sleep, even though I barely got any unpacking done at all. I did notice something odd. Outside the window that looked over my backyard, I saw the silhouette of a lady with her dog by the road. This wouldn't be abnormal on its own, but for 3 nights in a row, I always saw her, at seemingly the exact same place. The next morning, I got up, and my day was instantly ruined when I saw that all the tires to my car had been slashed. So much for small town hospitality. I was almost beginning to swear when I heard a warm voice say,
"In trouble there, neighbor?"
It was Gary. From the way he approached me, it was like he'd been waiting all this time behind the corner just to pop up when I noticed the slashed tires. Yeah, someone did this," I said.
"Oof, looks like we've got ourselves a troublemaker on the loose there,"
Gary said.
"We should let the sheriff know. Oh, there he is."
In what possibly couldn't be a coincidence, the sheriff strolled right up to us, as if he had just been strolling around the neighborhood.
"Good morning there. And, oh, is this our new resident?"
He introduced himself and assured me that he would look into the matter. And as with all the other conversations I had up till now, it lasted 3 times longer than necessary. I was really beginning to become impatient. At the time, I just chalked it up to folk from a small town being different. Though, now that I look back on things, they were definitely dragging out those conversations as much as possible. Gary offered me a ride to work, which I accepted, given I had no real other options. He talked a lot about his own life, only occasionally asking me questions about mine. In case you were wondering what it is I was doing there, I was a reporter working on a story. I was looking into a story regarding a factory near the town. And so, Gary was nice enough to drop me off at the town library, which also housed its records. It was fairly old. It didn't even have a digital system in place. They still used those old cards you would write into if you wanted to check out a book. You would think that at the very least, in a library, I would get some peace and quiet. But no. The librarian and her 2 assistants walked up to speak to me. They shooed away the other patrons who also seemed to want to introduce themselves, and began explaining how the library worked. Again, the conversation lasted way too long for my liking. I tried to focus on my work, but I really couldn't. I noticed it ever so slightly. People were waiting for me around every corner. Their faces were in books that they clearly weren't reading, as they were on the same page for almost 2 hours. I didn't make much headway as I made my way to leave, unsure of how I would even get back home, when the second I stepped out the library, I ran into Gary.
Hey there.
Oh, Gary. Were you waiting for me all this time?
Ah, shucks, no. Of course not. I was just in the area and remembered you didn't have a ride home. I realized the library closes around this time, so I thought I'd give you a lift.
Thank you, I said, very creeped out. On the drive back, Gary told me that there was to be a large party over at his house tomorrow afternoon. I said I had to work, but Gary told me the library was closed on weekends. I found that to be very odd, but had no real way of confirming that it was wrong. So I shrugged and said that I would be there. That night, again, I saw the lady with her dog across the street, in the same spot. I still didn't think too much of it. The next day was the party, and to my surprise, it looked like half the town had shown up. I was immediately ushered in and asked to sit down in the center of the living room. It was as if I was the birthday boy at a kid's party. Everyone wanted to speak with me. It was nice for a while, but became quite overwhelming thereafter. That night, I again saw the lady with her dog across the street. I could swear she was in the exact same spot again. This time, I decided to check it out. I went ahead and opened the door, going for an evening stroll. I walked down the road and I saw the woman. She was in her mid-40s, walking a golden retriever. She was no longer standing still, but was walking up to me, eager to introduce herself. She walked the same route every day, she told me, and was really excited to see the new face, who was all the buzz around town. The next day I tried to get some new tires, but every shop in town was sold out. And by every shop, I mean the only two here. Despite how friendly everyone was, none of them had a spare set of tires, something I found hard to believe. They did manage to find a bicycle I could borrow though, which was good enough to get to the grocery store and back. It took me over an hour to get to the library for my job though. Gary kept offering to drive me there, but I always refused. I did actually start to get some real work done though, and it went on like that for a week, when my bike was stolen. The sheriff was right around the corner, just like last time, and Gary later joined us, offering me a ride. Now, I couldn't even get someone to lend me their bicycle anymore. That night, I saw her again. That same lady, standing across the street in the exact same spot. I went for a walk just like last time, and she ran into me, as if she had been expecting me. I had no idea what was happening around this place. I felt nauseous and didn't come out of the house for 2 days, just whiling away the time on my laptop. I had made my decision then. Screw this job. I was getting out of here. I called my boss and told him I was leaving, and given I somehow still didn't have new tires, I just called for a taxi company. I'd get my car back some other way. I didn't want to live here a moment longer. The night before my planned escape, I suddenly woke up, startled by a noise downstairs. I went down and saw that it was Gary. He wasn't carrying a weapon of any sort, and didn't look threatening in any way, but he was in my house at 2 in the morning. Gary, how did you get in? I asked him.
Picked the lock. The locksmith helped,
he said. I grabbed a nearby umbrella. Hardly an adequate weapon, but the closest thing near me. Don't get any closer.
Whoa, I don't want to bother you,
Gary said, seemingly not realizing how weird this whole situation was.
I just wanted to let you know that you can't leave.
That confirmed my suspicions when I heard a voice from outside.
Gary, how long are you going to hog everything for yourself?
We want our turn.
What happened to sharing is caring?
I looked outside the window and saw the townsfolk had surrounded my house. What is going on? I demanded.
It's hard to explain,
Gary said.
But let me start at the beginning. The factory you were looking into, it wasn't a factory at all. It was a research facility for the military. We don't know why, but they made us. They made us like this, eternally trapped in this town. They abandoned us. We don't know why, just that it seems they wanted to curse us. I know no other reason as to why they should torment us so.
His face twisted into a snarl.
We are background characters. We have little will of our own. It's only when someone like you comes from the outside that we find our purpose. That this town of ours has life breathed into it. Did you know what my days were like before you came along? I would stand in an empty house with my family for hours on end, just staring at a blank wall, unable to eat or drink or sleep, unable to feel, unable to express myself. I can't even talk to members of my family unless you come around. I think you have a term for us,
Gary said.
NPCs, side characters. That's what we are. We can't do anything unless you come around. And I loved it so much when you were here. I felt alive for the first time in years. Did you know something? My house is actually empty. No furniture. Nothing at all. Everything that you saw in there on the day of the party, it materialized only when you came in. I could go home back to an empty house, but I won't anymore.
He began to move.
Come with me.
I ran upstairs and locked my bedroom door, barricading myself in as well as I could have. I looked out my window and saw a sea of people there. I can hear them at my door. Any minute now, they'll get in. I have family outside here, guys. I don't want to spend my life being a prisoner of whatever things live in this town. Oh, God. I'm shaking as I record this on my phone. I don't know what I can do in this situation. Oh God. I think I can smell smoke. They're definitely starting a fire, knowing I'll have to jump out of the window. I don't know if they'll fight over me, or try to tear me apart so each of them gets a piece. But they're not going to leave me alone. They may all be prisoners here, but it looks like I'll end up being another inmate along with them. What's the worst that could happen if you helped out your elderly neighbor? I found out, and I can never forget it. My mum means well, but she's a pain in the ass. I know what you're going to say, but just hear me out. I'm in the final year of high school, sending out college applications and everything. But then, out of the blue, she says, "Help out Mr. Brandt next door with his mail and groceries, will you?" What? Like now? No. Every day. He's getting old. He needs help. Why don't you do it? I wish I didn't ask that. Everybody except me knows to not ask your mum that. She gave me this look like she would tear me a new one. So the next day, I was helping Mr. Brandt with his mail and groceries. I never really got to know Mr. Brandt before then. I don't think anybody really knows their neighbors anymore. But my only impression from him was that he was some cranky old guy that used to stare at me like he was angry at me or something. So I didn't know what to expect when I brought his mail to the door for the first time. Half a minute after knocking on the door opens to reveal Mr. Brandt. Grey hair, wrinkles, bad posture, holding a walking stick. Classic old guy stuff. But that intense stare that I remembered was gone, replaced with a gentle smile and genuine excitement in his eyes.
"You must be Carol's son, from next door,"
he said with a distinct, raspy voice. I nodded. I wasn't being rude or nothing, but Mr. Brandt teased me about it anyway.
"She didn't say you were mute as well."
No, I mean, yeah, I'm her son.
Nah, just kidding. I kid. But really, thank you. I really appreciate it. It's kind of hard getting around after my fall off the porch. I mentioned it to your mother, and she insisted that you would help out.
Thanks, Mum.
It will only be temporary, though. Just a few months, and then you can go back to chasing girls or whatever it is you kids do these days. But I just have to ask, when the groceries arrive, could you bring them upstairs to the fridge?
I hesitated a little, but I thought, why not? Didn't seem too unreasonable. He said it was only going to be for a few months, so yeah, I agreed. He gave me a copy of his house key, and when his groceries arrived at his front porch, I knocked on his front door, and from upstairs, he yelled out in his distinct raspy voice,
"Let yourself in. I'm up here."
The door was unlocked, to my surprise, so I let myself in. I picked up the groceries and headed up the stairs. His house was actually warm and inviting. The mahogany staircase reflected the sunlight shining through the windows and lit up the photos of a younger Mr. Brandt. He was fishing, diving, driving jeeps, posing in front of airplanes. He had photos with his kids when he was younger, with his kids when they were older, with his grandkids now. It was honestly a side I'd never seen of Mr. Brandt. I don't know. I just hadn't thought about my neighbor, you know? Also partly explained why he still went upstairs, even though he's supposed to be recovering from a fall. When I reached the staircase, he called out again in his distinct raspy voice from the room at the end of the second-story hall.
"In here. Bring them in here."
Mr. Brandt was in a study room of sorts. He was sitting behind a large desk, reading one of the thickest books I've ever seen. On all walls were stacks and stacks of bookcases, in mismatched bookcases. Seriously, there was not two of the same bookcase in that room. The sunlight streaming through the window behind the desk gave Mr. Brandt a weird soft glow as he looked up and greeted me.
"Thanks, kid,"
he said in his raspy voice.
"Just put them in the fridge next to you."
I was so fixed on all the books that I didn't notice the small fridge to my left, with books stacked on top of it. I was half expecting books to be inside the thing as well, but there was only a bottle of milk in there.
"Thanks for this. I really appreciate your mum organizing this for me."
Mr. Brandt smiled as he said that. Not at all like the old thogie I thought he was. "Yeah, no problem," I said as I unloaded the groceries in his fridge. Curiosity got the best of me, so I had to ask, "What's with all the books?" The old man chuckled.
"When you got as much time as I do, you can read all the books you want. Suppose I'm a book hoarder."
I actually learned about the old man, and it turned out he was kinda cool. Actually joined the Navy when he was straight out of high school, but ended up hating it, so went to work for the city council, doing maintenance jobs. He hated that, but learned to live with it after he met his wife, after the sewer pipe burst in front of her house. "Find a woman who loves you, even when you're covered in crap," he told me. Started a family with her, settled down. He said he lived a happy and full life. I helped out with his groceries and garbage for over a week to help him recover from his fall. I really liked him. Was always friendly. Just a really cool guy to know. But this isn't the story where I tell you what an awesome person my neighbor was. I really wish it was. As I said, it was over a week I was helping out Mr. Brandt, when, one night, I woke up when I thought I heard a scream. I checked my phone to see that it was 2:43 a.m., and I just sat in bed for a few minutes. I could have sworn I heard someone scream, but it was so short that maybe I only dreamed it. I didn't think it was a big deal eventually, and it didn't seem like anybody else woke up. So I thought it was either me still dreaming, or some random in the street who decided to stretch his vocal cords. I went back to sleep pretty quickly. The next day I didn't collect Mr. Brandt's mail until after school. With mail in hand, I knocked on the door. No response. No biggie. I remembered Mr. Brandt said he sometimes liked to take a nap, so I should just knock again to wake him up. So I did. And I called out in case that didn't work. But still, nothing. After half a minute or so, I decided that I would just come inside and check on the old fella. Make sure he's alright. When somewhere pretty close to the door, I heard his distinct raspy voice call out.
"Who is it?"
The voice said. "It's just me. I've got your mail. I'll just come inside."
"No, don't. There's no need."
The voice shot back really quickly. It sounded like Mr. Brandt, but he sounded down. Like he lacked energy or something. Even for 75, Mr. Brandt had a lot of energy, despite his fall. "You sure?" I asked, concerned.
"Yes. Drop the mail and go."
I shrugged. It wasn't my mail, so why would I care? Well, I didn't drop it, but I did put his mail down before the door on the porch. But before I went, something got the better of me, and I had to ask. "Did you hear a yell or a scream last night, Mr. Brandt? I think some noise woke me up." There was a pause. I was now actually starting to get worried for Mr. Brandt. This was the first time he didn't want me to bring his mail. He needed his mail, but I think he was also looking forward to have somebody to talk to. Eventually, the voice behind the door responded.
No sound."
I really started to get worried by the second day. It was grocery day. Milk, eggs, bread, all that. That's not important. What's important was when I knocked on the door. I got no response. It's not like Mr. Brandt goes anywhere, so naturally I started to freak out. What if he was dead lying on the floor somewhere? I tried opening the door, but it was locked. I didn't have a key on me either. So, and I'm not recommending anyone try this, but I tried opening one of the house's front windows. None of the front windows budged, so I thought about going around the back would be the best option. I got around the corner, and just as I passed the living room window, I jumped out of my skin.
"What are you doing?"
said Mr. Brandt in his distinct raspy voice behind the curtain. Couldn't really get a good view of him. "Your groceries are here, and then you didn't answer, so I thought I'd try and check up on—"
"Really? More like breaking and entering."
Okay, this was starting to get a bit weird. Mr. Brandt was normally friendlier than this. Now he's behaving like some Japanese princess behind a curtain. "Did you want me to bring the groceries inside, Mr. Brandt?"
"No."
He pulled back the curtain and just stared at me. There was something about his face. Granted, I'd never actually seen him angry before, but his face was bloated, drooping, sad. But above all, it was just terrifying. That was definitely Mr. Brandt I was looking at through the window, but at the same time it wasn't. It was like he changed. Personality, attitude, his face. I just nodded. I thought I knew him, but I guess not that well. I mean, it's only been a week, right? So I backed off sheepishly. "All right. I hope you're feeling better, Mr. Brandt." No response. He stared for a few moments and closed the curtain. What happened to that old guy? Nice and friendly to weird and creepy in less than 2 weeks. I told my mom about it later that night, and she just told me that old people are like that sometimes. But I shouldn't judge. I asked her if I should still be helping out Mr. Brandt, and she said of course I should. So the next day, I got Mr. Brandt's mail and knocked on the front door. No response. "Mr. Brandt," I yelled out. He's dead. Maybe. I know it's horrible to think about, but that was the first thing to cross my mind. I couldn't just leave him there. Could I? No, I couldn't. So I went around the back door and opened it. When I opened it, a shiver ran down my spine. It was the same old house I'd been in heaps of times before, but there was stillness in the air. I just knew Mr. Brandt was in trouble, if not dead. So I called out again. Not that I was expecting him to respond, but I hope he did. He didn't, though. I walked to the base of the stairs and was half expecting his dead body there. An accidental fall or something. So you can imagine my relief when there was no Mr. Brandt lying there. That just left upstairs. After some deep breaths, I started going up the stairs, each step creaking underneath my weight. It was like some backwards organ at a funeral. It freaked me out. Anyway, I got to the second story, and that's when the smell hit me. Legit, never smelled anything like it before. I guess if I had to describe it, it's like if you ducked your head in a rancid bin the night before it gets collected. But you know, it was worse. I don't know why, but I was smelling death. I just knew it. My heart dropped when that thought entered my head. Each step towards Mr. Brandt's study was slow. I was just hoping Mr. Brandt would hop out of his study and go, "Kidding, I'm alright." Then everything could go back to normal. Nope. The closer I got, the more I knew this wasn't going to end well. Each step took me closer to something I didn't want to see. I wanted to just turn around and let someone else deal with it. But I got his mail and groceries for the past week, so I sort of felt responsible, you know? Like I should be the one to find Mr. Brandt. When I reached the doorway, I stopped, took a deep breath of the air that smelled like death, and turned into Mr. Brandt's office. His face was missing. Mr. Brandt's body was sitting in the chair behind the desk, and his face was missing. He was still wearing his clothes. He was a corpse, and his face was missing. I hadn't even done an anatomy class yet, so this turned out to be my first dead thing I ever saw. Mr. Brandt's corpse was staring right at me, his eyeballs in full view, wide open, because he didn't have eyelids anymore. I wouldn't describe him as grinning, but his teeth were on full display. And the color was surreal. It was a deep red, the blood, the flesh, the muscles on his face, all this deep red. I didn't want to walk towards him. It nearly knocked me out. Just the sight of his bloody corpse caused me to throw up in my mouth. Bits of vomit were dribbling from my lips. I started to get lightheaded. Who would I even tell first? How did this happen? It took me a few moments to figure out what that noise was. It was the creaking of the stairs. Somebody was coming up the stairs. Somebody was in the house with me. Somebody was going to take my face off like Mr. Brandt. I didn't want to die, and I definitely didn't want my face taken off. I looked around me and panicked. My breathing was getting heavier, and I was sweating, just sweating, with the creaks, the stench, the bloody face. I couldn't think straight. They were starting to get faster and faster. Whoever it was, they were closing in. I kept panicking and going from one side of the room to the other. I was going to die here, I thought. Then I looked at the body of Mr. Brandt for one last time, sitting at his desk in front of the window. The window. You're probably thinking I'm an idiot for not thinking of it earlier, but I was panicking too much to think straight. I basically ran to the window, but I was so terrified it made the window latch seem like a Rubik's Cube. Then I heard the creaking stop. Whoever it was had reached the hallway and was walking right toward this room. Through sheer adrenaline, I just straight up broke the latch and forced the window open. I would like to say that I jumped through the window, but I pretty much just crawled through it, banging my head, knees and elbows all over the place. The fear pounding my head made me the most uncoordinated thing on the planet. That only got worse when I tumbled down and landed on the bushes by the side of the house. I don't know how, but I didn't feel hurt, so I bolted straight back to my house, locked the doors, shut the windows, grabbed my Mossberg, called the police and sat in the corner of the bathroom, aiming my rifle at the doorway in case anybody tried to enter. 10 minutes later, the police arrived. It nearly turned into a crisis situation when I greeted them still holding my Mossberg, but they could see I was scared shitless, and nothing happened, thankfully. They didn't find anybody in Mr. Brandt's house, apart from Mr. Brandt. They said he was murdered, which was obvious, but they also said he had been dead for 3 days. When I heard that, I told them that I talked to him and saw him in the past 3 days, but they reassured me and my mum that the coroner was certain he'd been dead. I don't know what to believe. Either the coroner was wrong, or I was talking and seeing someone whoever you are, you sick fuck. There ain't no punishment cruel enough for what you've done. Hello, Sinister listeners. If you've enjoyed this story, then you'll find all the author's information in the description below. For more content, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to succumb to the sinister.